Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into a world where beauty wasn't just skin deep, it was soul deep, sin deep, and suspiciously mud-splattered. You're waking up in a medieval village, maybe around the 12th century, maybe a little later. The first thing you hear isn't birdsong or your favorite alarm tone, it's the low clang of church bells calling you to prayer, reminding you that salvation is a full-time job. You groggily sit up on a straw-stuffed mattress, brush hay from your hair, and try not to breathe too deeply. There's a reason scented herbs hang from the rafters, and guess what? You probably won't survive this, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Who else is drifting off somewhere between midnight and 3 a.m. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not beautiful, not yet. But don't worry, no one else is either, at least not by modern standards. In this time, beauty isn't about perfection. It's about purity. Which is good, because you haven't had a bath in a while, and your last dental appointment was never. Still, in your village, wood smoke curling from thatched rooftops, pigs snorting in alleyways, you are judged every single day. And not by Instagram likes. By God. And your neighbors. But mostly God. Beauty in medieval Europe is a virtue, not a vibe. It's tangled up in morality, modesty, and class. That means you can't just throw on a nice dress and flutter your eyelashes. You have to live righteously, or at least convincingly. If you're a woman, being beautiful means being quiet, covered, and pale, not from foundation, but from staying indoors. If you're a man, it's a little simpler, broad shoulders, bravery, and not dying in battle too early. Let's talk hygiene, brace yourself. In theory, cleanliness is next to godliness, but in practice, it's a bit patchy. You might wash your hands before meals. You might even rinse your face with cold water in the mornings. But full baths? Those are rare, suspicious, and sometimes outright frowned upon. There are even monks warning that bathing too often could lead to sin, because who knows what wicked thoughts might bubble up in warm water. You once heard a tale about a noble woman who bathed twice a month and was whispered about as if she were a temptress. That's the level we're working with. Public bathhouses do exist in cities, and they even serve as social spaces, but they're often noisy, co-ed, and full of rumors. Oh, and sometimes syphilis. So, you mostly stick with a basin of water, a rough cloth, and lots of hope. Still, even with dirt under your nails, you're expected to look proper. That means your outer appearance needs to reflect your inner holiness. Imagine living in a world where people genuinely believe your freckles might be signs of sin. Not everyone buys into it fully, of course. There's always that one neighbor who wears rouge behind closed shutters, but the pressure is real, and speaking of pressure, you're poor. Or maybe not exactly poor, but definitely not noble. Which means your wardrobe is functional, not fashionable. One tunic. One pair of shoes, maybe. You can't afford the luxurious imported silks or fancy buttons that mark the upper classes. Your dress is wool, your hair is probably covered, and your skin is sun-kissed, not because you want a tan, but because you work in the fields. Here's the kicker, being tan makes you less attractive in medieval Europe. Unlike today's beach-bronzed ideals, fair skin is prized because it means you don't have to labor outside. It whispers of wealth, leisure, and cloistered femininity. Historians still argue whether this obsession with pallor comes from ancient Roman aesthetics or medieval medical theories about humors, yes, bodily fluids, but either way. Your freckles aren't helping, and yet, within your own class, you might be considered beautiful. Maybe your eyes are bright, your teeth only slightly crooked, and your laughter makes people stop and look. There's always someone who finds someone attractive, even if they smell like onions and sheep. Romance exists, even if it's often practical. Courtship dances happen, and people sneak glances at each other in the churchyard. That's another thing. Church is the runway of the medieval village. Everyone's there, dressed in their cleanest smock, trying to look holy and silently judging the girl who wore blue again. You kneel. You sing. You try not to itch. And when the sermon warns against vanity, you try not to wonder if your veil is slipping in a flattering way. Let's zoom out for a second. Across Europe, beauty standards vary by region and decade. In France, fair hair is idealized. In England, people write poems about rosy cheeks and snow-white skin. In Italy, artists begin dabbling in portraits that make noses slimmer and eyes bigger. But for the average person, you included, beauty is not about art. It's about fitting in. Not standing out. Now imagine you've fallen ill, just a little fever. Immediately, your complexion changes. In a world without modern medicine, your face becomes a public record of your health and moral worth. If you're flushed, people whisper lust. If you're pale, maybe you're virtuous, or maybe you're dying. Either way, you're being read like a stained manuscript. And you have zero say in the interpretation. Here's a fun one. If you're a young woman, a bit of roundness is considered attractive. Not the sculpted kind, more like she eats bread regularly and doesn't have worms. But not too round. Gluttony is a sin, and your body shouldn't suggest indulgence. You're supposed to walk a tightrope of modest vitality, fertile, but not flirty. Healthy, but not hedonistic. And preferably quiet about all of it. Quirky tidbit time. Did you know some women rub dove dung on their faces to brighten their skin? It's true. Along with vinegar, powdered lead, and crushed pearls, if they could afford it. Men weren't exempt either. Knights might rub lard into their beards or pluck their hairlines to seem more noble. Beauty, it seems, requires sacrifice. Sometimes painful. Sometimes smelly, but let's not forget the spiritual side. Saints are the ultimate beauty icons. Their faces glow in frescoes, their bodies remain miraculously preserved. You, peasant listener, are encouraged to emulate their chastity and gentleness. There's a tale of Saint Agnes whose hair grew instantly long to cover her nakedness. That's the kind of beauty you should aspire to, magical modesty. Not exactly something you can get at the village market. Still, even saints have types. Blonde is better. Blue eyes are praised. And while there's no medieval Tinder, troubadours compose love songs that describe golden-haired maidens with lips like cherries. These songs travel from court to tavern, shaping ideals across countries. You hear them, even if you don't believe them. And sometimes, just sometimes, you wish your hair was longer. Or your nose was straighter. Or your ankles more delicate. It's not all bleak. There are moments of self-love. Maybe your mother once told you your eyes look like your grandmother's, sharp and kind. Maybe the boy from the bakery smiled at you for no reason. Maybe you laugh with your friends by the river and forget about church bells and pale skin. Those are the moments you carry with you. Small rebellions against the grind of expectation. Let's circle back to dirt. Yes, you're often dirty. But everyone is. That shared grime becomes invisible after a while. You don't see the mud on your hem or the smudge on your cheek. You see your friends, your work, the sky. And in those moments, beauty is something quieter. A glint in the eye. A whispered prayer. A daisy tucked behind an ear. Of course, there's always danger. If you're too beautiful, people might accuse you of witchcraft. If you're not beautiful enough, they might say you've sinned. Either way, your appearance becomes a risk. But you keep going. You braid your hair. You wash your hands. You look in puddles and pretend they're mirrors. And sometimes, when no one's watching, you smile at your reflection, because even in the mud, under judgment, and wearing the same tunic for a month, you are still you. And that, in the medieval world, is an achievement. The philosophers are still arguing, you can't hear every word, but you catch enough as you shuffle past the stone columns of a crumbling villa turned church library school storage closet. They're not your philosophers, of course, you're just a lowly listener, maybe an assistant to the scribe, but the voices drift through the air like incense. Something about ideal forms, symmetrical bodies, golden ratios. Something about the ancient Greeks. And for a moment, you wonder if beauty was easier back then. Spoiler, it wasn't. The medieval world has a love-hate relationship with classical antiquity. On the one hand, monks are painstakingly copying Aristotle and Galen by candlelight. On the other hand, the church keeps reminding everyone that pagan Rome fell for a reason. Beauty in that old world was about proportion, geometry, and athleticism, sculpted abs, chiseled noses, and the kind of nudity that says public fountain rather than scandal. But now, things have changed. You still see those Roman statues sometimes, repurposed as saints or shoved in corners, their dignity slightly chipped. They're muscular, sure. Serene. But they feel suspect. There's a lingering unease about how naked and proud they are. Medieval scholars will write about natural beauty and the virtues of balance, but they'll also dress their saints in full-length robes and erase anything that suggests real skin. You're in a time that inherited the art, but not the attitude. You walk past a fresco that was once Jupiter, now rebranded as a generic angel with suspiciously good bone structure. It's been sanitized, clothed, Christianized, flattened. The Romans might have adored the human body, but here, beauty is no longer worshipped. It's tolerated, so long as it preys on time and keeps its head down. Still, the whispers of classical ideals haunt everything. If you're educated, which you're probably not, but let's pretend, you've read that men should have broad shoulders and narrow hips, and women should have rounded limbs and high foreheads. Not because someone likes that look, but because it aligns with natural order. Harmony. Divine design. And if your body doesn't match that order, well, maybe you're just a little closer to chaos. Historians still argue whether medieval aesthetics were truly influenced by classical models or simply ran parallel, drawing from shared human instincts. But you can feel the tension. You've seen the illuminated manuscripts where angels look suspiciously like Greco-Roman nymphs with halos. You've helped carry a codex where beauty is described as radiance reflecting divine reason. And you've seen the real people in your village, the squinting, limping, tooth-missing masses, and you know they weren't consulted. Let's talk faces. In the Greco-Roman model, symmetry was everything. A perfectly aligned profile, eyes set just so, lips curved like temple cornices. This logic survives into your time, only it's less about physical perfection and more about moral clarity. A beautiful face is assumed to be a good face. People actually believe that if someone looks honest, they probably are. And that a crooked smile might suggest a crooked soul. This plays out in courtrooms, in markets, even in marriage negotiations. Beauty isn't just desirable, it's suspiciously informative. A smooth brow might mean a calm mind. A ruddy cheek suggests good health and good blood. Your nose. Too small and they'll call you weak. Too big and they'll mutter about gluttony. Too pointed. Witch. Too flat. Peasant. There's no winning, but there are endless opinions, and yet, you still catch people trying. That young scribe with the inkwell-stained fingers smoothing his hair before church. That girl with the scar along her jaw who wears her veil a little lower on one side. Everyone performs. Not out of vanity, but survival. Because being beautiful, or close enough, can mean getting better treatment. Or a kinder marriage. Or fewer accusations when the cows die. You once overheard a noblewoman discussing her daughter's prospects. She said, she's no Helen of Troy, but her forehead's wide, and her hips are promising. That's the bar. No one expects Aphrodite. Just a face that doesn't offend and a body that might bear heirs. It's pragmatic beauty. Usefulness dressed in metaphor. Now let's address the temples in the room, the real classical ruins. They still stand, half swallowed by vines or repurposed into chapels. You've seen travelers stop and stare at them, artists sketching their lines into little books. There's reverence there. A kind of longing. Some part of the medieval soul remembers that older world and wonders what it felt like to walk those marble halls without shame. What it felt like to be beautiful without apology. But then you look down at your own feet, cracked leather shoes, a blister on your heel, and you remember where you are. In a time where beauty is filtered through penance, not pleasure, still, Roman ideals sneak in. Especially at court. You once attended a festival where a performer dressed as Venus, complete with golden wig and painted cheeks. Everyone clapped, though someone muttered that it was a bit decadent. You could see the old world shimmering through the performance, like someone had shaken the dust off a statue and it had blinked. And in poetry? Oh, poetry is where the Greco-Roman ghosts live loudest. Bards and troubadours described their lovers with mythic metaphors, eyes like Pallas Athena, hair like cornfields in August, lips that would make even Apollo pause. No one actually looks like this. Not even the poet. But in verse, beauty is both ancient and eternal. It loops back through time and forward through dreams. Here's a fun fact. Some medieval doctors used Greek theories of body types to diagnose people. You might be told you're choleric and should avoid spicy food. Or melancholic and need more rest. These same theories were sometimes used to explain why someone looked the way they did. Bad skin. Too much black bile. Pale lips. Cold temperament. Your body is red like a recipe gone slightly off. It's never just appearance, it's always evidence, and then there's hair. The Greeks adored curls, especially blonde ones. This preference trickles into your era, where fair hair becomes a marker of youth and virtue. Even if your natural hair is dark, you might dust it with chalk or rinse it in lye to coax out a paler shade. It's risky, lye can burn, but so is existing in a system where appearance affects everything from marriage to mercy. One of the abbots in your town once gave a sermon about how golden hair reflected the light of heaven. You didn't ask why baldness wasn't divine. You just bowed your head and tried not to snicker. Some beauty practices feel ancient, even if no one says so. Women plucking their brows to achieve a smooth forehead, echoing statues they've never seen. Men grooming their beards in the hope of appearing noble and strong. Herbal salves passed down by midwives who call them blessings but maybe mean rituals. The old world never really died. It just put on a robe and started singing psalms, and yet, even with all this history behind you, your own reflection is still complicated. There are no mirrors, not really. Maybe polished metal, or a puddle, or someone else's opinion. You don't wake up and check your symmetry. You wake up and check your chores. Beauty is something you hope for, but rarely name. It lives on the edges of life, in compliments, in songs, in the way someone looks at you across a shared loaf of bread, quirky tidbit for the road. There's a medieval legend that Aristotle himself once fell in love with a woman who rode him like a horse. It's an allegory, probably, meant to warn men against female wiles. But deep down, you suspect it's just another story about how beauty bends even the most logical minds. Even philosophers shrug eventually, so you go on. You wrap your scarf, straighten your posture, and try to look like someone with good humor and clean thoughts. Somewhere between the columns of forgotten temples and the steeples of present-day churches, you walk, neither statue nor saint, just a person in a world that keeps redrawing the line between beautiful and not. And sometimes, late at night, you dream of marble baths and sunlit courtyards. You dream of being sculpted, not into someone else's ideal, but simply seen. Balanced. Named. Enough, but let's not get carried away with the statues and scholars. You still have chores to do. you're hauling a bucket of well water when you pass an old woman sitting near the church wall, her head wrapped, her hands still but her eyes sharp. She sees everything. And when she looks at you, she doesn't see the golden ratio. She sees whether your hem is too short, your cheeks too flushed, your hair too visible. And maybe, just maybe, she remembers when she was the girl everyone compared to a Madonna fresco, because here's the thing no one says out loud, the Greco-Roman ideals don't age well. Youth was beauty then, and it still is now. In those old sculptures, the bodies are timeless, frozen in their prime. But real people wrinkle, stoop, soften. And in the medieval world, aging is often seen as wisdom, yes, but rarely as beauty. You know what the old texts say. That outer beauty is fleeting and suspect, while inner beauty is eternal and divine. It's written in Latin somewhere, probably carved into a monastery arch. And yet, you've seen the same priest who preaches detachment from vanity sneak a glance at the baker's daughter during evening prayer. You're supposed to not care. That's the ideal. To rise above appearance. To cultivate humility, modesty, grace. But you do care. Because beauty can mean softer judgments, better matches, kinder gossip. And even though everyone pretends not to value it, they do. Quietly. Powerfully. In whispers and side eyes, at the manuscript table, one of the illuminators adds a curl to the Virgin Mary's hair, delicate. Golden, unnatural. You say nothing. But you notice, somewhere, nobles are commissioning portraits. The artists use Roman templates, long noses, delicate brows, slightly idealized eyes. They're not trying to capture the sitter exactly, they're trying to honor them. And honoring someone, in this time, often means making them look like someone from the past. You hear it in the songs, too. The minstrels still play in taverns and courts, describing women with ivory throats and brows like moonlit arches. You can't help but glance in a puddle the next time it rains. Not to admire yourself, just to check if your reflection fits inside someone else's lyric, and all the while, those Greco-Roman ideals don't vanish. They just mutate, get baptized, veiled, half forgotten but never quite buried. They whisper from the edges of illuminated scrolls and architectural flourishes. They lean silently from the corners of broken statues tucked behind the cathedral. Sometimes, when no one's watching, you wonder what it would feel like to be immortalized that way. Not as a warning, not as a virtue, not as a symbol, but simply as a person. A body balanced by design. A face left uncorrected, and then the bell tolls again, and you remember where you are. The philosophers may still be arguing, but you've got bread to bake and hay to haul. Beauty, you realize, isn't just something you see. It's something you carry, quietly, like the memory of a sculpture too heavy to lift but impossible to forget that you're not sunburned. You're just poor, that's what fair skin means here. Not porcelain luxury or some delicate bloom of genetics, it means you don't have to work in the fields. You don't have to sweat under the July sun, or shovel out the cow pen at dawn, or carry your body across muddy hills hauling firewood. If your skin is pale, it whispers to others, this person stays indoors. This person eats food grown by other hands. This person is not suffering, not physically. Anyway, fairness isn't just a look, it's a signal. You're standing outside a market stall, watching a noble woman pass by on horseback. Her veil is so sheer it might as well be gossamer, and beneath it, her face is smooth, pale, and untouched by weather. You don't envy her. Not really. But you do notice how everyone parts for her. How even the baker stops needing to nod. How no one dares question whether she's holy, or clever, or even kind. Her skin does the talking. Fairness, literal, creamy fairness, is practically currency. Especially for women. Men can get away with being sun-darkened if it's the result of battle or travel. But you're expected to be untouched by weather, labor, and experience. A blank canvas of virtue. The paler, the better, the obsession runs deep. Entire folktales hinge on it. The princess is always white as snow, not sunset bronze. Saints are described with alabaster limbs, moonlight skin, cheeks like rose petals pressed into linen. And paintings? Every woman looks like she's allergic to daylight. The blush might be painted in, but the base is pale, sometimes disturbingly so. You remember one of the tapestries in the cathedral, Mary seated under an arch of lilies, her face smooth as linen, her hands clasped in prayer. No freckles. No shadows. No blemishes. Just purity in woven thread. It's not just art. It's instruction. Historians still argue whether this power obsession stems more from ancient ideals, Christian purity codes, or economic symbolism, but honestly, it doesn't matter to you. All you know is that the paler you look, the more people assume good things about you. So, what do you do if you're naturally darker? Maybe your skin tans easily. Maybe your heritage is different. Maybe you just live too close to the coast. Well, then you try. You stay out of the sun when you can. You wear hoods. You scrub your face with sour milk or powdered chalk. Some women go further, rubbing lead-based creams into their skin, hoping to look just sickly enough to be admired. It's dangerous, sure. But looking healthy isn't the point. Looking delicate is. There's a kind of calculated fragility that's considered beautiful now. A certain softness in the cheeks, a translucent quality to the skin, as though the person might swoon if spoken to too harshly. You've seen girls practice fainting in the grass, falling like feathers. There's nothing spontaneous about it. Even weakness becomes theater, but don't think the standards stop at skin tone. Oh no. Veins are part of it too. Visible blue veins on the wrist or temple. Absolutely ideal. They suggest thin, light skin. They suggest purity of blood and lineage. You once overheard a noblewoman comparing the veins on her hand to a river map. She was pleased. You didn't quite understand, but you nodded anyway. Let's pause for a moment on the weirdest bit. In some regions, people believed that blue veins on pale skin signified noble birth, literal evidence of better breeding. It wasn't enough to act upper class, you had to look it, too. Your face became your resume. Your hands your biography. Now imagine what that means for everyone else. If you're a peasant, outdoor laborer, fisherwoman, shepherd, you can forget it. You're darker. Browner. Because pale equals precious. It's the math of medieval attraction, but it's not just for women. Men, too, are judged, though with slightly different calculations. A knight with sunburned cheeks might be forgiven, especially if he's just returned from a crusade. That kind of tan is heroic. But a clerk or nobleman with dark skin? That might raise eyebrows. Is he lazy? Is he unclean? Unholy? No one says it out loud, but the questions hang in the air. In sermons, priests talk about the body as a vessel for the soul. But the congregation is still watching each other's skin. Pale hands folded in prayer get more trust. Pale faces in candlelight seem more devout. You could be a monster inside. But if your complexion is delicate, people will assume you're saintly. There's a paradox here, of course. A hypocrisy. Because while the church warns against pride in appearance, it's still commissioning paintings of saints with milky complexions and gold-flecked halos. Even the Virgin Mary starts looking more like a noblewoman and less like a Middle Eastern mother. Reality bends toward expectation. Sometimes you wonder what actual holiness would look like. Dirt under the nails. Cracked heels. A sun-marked face. Probably. But those faces don't get embroidered into altar cloths. There's a moment, once a year, when the Mayfair arrives in your village. Everyone dresses in their best. Even the poorest girl finds a way to braid flowers into her hair. And just for a day, the rules bend. Brown skin glows under garlands. Faces that are usually dismissed get adorned. And beauty expands, blooms, spills into the streets like spilled cider. You love those days. Because for once, no one's trying to look pale. They're trying to look alive, and maybe that's the secret. Not alabaster or powder. Not lead or leeches. Just life. Wrinkles from smiling. Freckles from joy. Calluses from kindness. You don't say that out loud, of course. You just keep carrying water and minding your chores. But when someone calls you beautiful, not fair, not noble, not delicate, just beautiful, you believe it. Even if it only lasts until the sun sets again and the mirrors go back to judging. Your hair is not just hair. It's a biography, a billboard, and a borderline security threat. It spills down your back in glossy waves, if you're lucky, or it's braided, hidden, shaved, or scorched into obedience by hot irons and social rules. In the medieval world, hair isn't something you casually flip over your shoulder or tie up with a scrunchie. It's a statement. A status symbol. And sometimes, a liability, because here's the thing, people aren't just looking at your hair, they're reading it. Is it visible? Covered? Shorn? Oiled? Gray? Curled? These details tell others everything they think they need to know. Your age. Your virtue. Your marital status. Your class. Your intentions. Even your mental state, if the rumors get lazy. And let's start with the big one, virginity. If you're unmarried, your hair is a public document. Long and loose. That's the signature of maidenhood. Braided and crowned with flowers. Also acceptable, especially for festivals and holy days. But once you marry, that hair disappears faster than a smile in church. No more letting it flow in public. No more golden tresses catching the sun as you walk past the blacksmith. Nope. You're veiled now. Literally and figuratively, in many places, a married woman not covering her hair is basically asking for side-eye, whispers, and maybe a light public shaming. Even noble women, especially noble women, wrap their heads in layers of linen, silk, and symbolism. The wimple, the barbette, the veil, each a clue in the great guessing game of who you are and where you belong. The church, of course, has thoughts. St. Paul's letters get quoted frequently. A woman's hair is her glory, but also her shame. It tempts men. Distracts from holiness. Must be controlled. And so, covered it is. In monasteries, it's often shaved entirely. Especially for nuns. A clean break from vanity. From desire. From choice. You once watched a girl cry silently as her head was shaved during a convent ceremony. Not out of horror, she had volunteered, but out of the bittersweet weight of what was being left behind. Childhood. Softness. The possibility of being seen as lovely. Hair is power. That's why it's hidden, and don't think the rules are the same everywhere. In some regions, uncovered hair might be normal for peasant women in the fields but scandalous in a market. In others, even girls must wear small veils by age 10. It depends on geography, culture, and who's watching. But the pressure to manage your hair exists in every village, town, and castle corridor. Now, let's talk style. Long is in. Always. Whether you're a noble or a milkmaid, length equals beauty. Hair that brushes your waist is considered luxurious, if it's clean, which is a big if. Washing is infrequent. Combing, daily. Lice. Frequent companions. You've probably seen women sitting outside in the sun, picking through each other's hair with thin iron combs, chatting and grimacing. You do what you can with what you've got. Oiling your hair with rosemary or crushed nettle to make it shine. braiding it tight to keep it from matting, wrapping it in cloth at night to prevent tangles. Some even sleep sitting upright to preserve a perfect coif for market days. That's dedication, and let's not forget the accessories. In noble courts, hair gets dressed up like royalty. Ribbons, circlets, even jeweled pins imported from far-off lands. Some styles get big, literally. There are cones and rolls and wire frames, with hair wound and pinned until it resembles architecture more than anatomy. Fashion, like always, gets weird. You once saw a noblewoman whose headdress made her 2 feet taller. She couldn't walk through doors without ducking. But people gasped when she entered, and that was the point. Fringe is frowned upon. High foreheads are all the rag. Especially in late medieval France and England. To achieve this, some women pluck their hairlines, yes, pluck, with tiny tweezers, often while reciting prayers or cursing gently under their breath. The goal is a wide, noble brow that supposedly reflects intelligence and serenity. You tried it once. It hurt. You stopped halfway and told people your cow startled you mid-pluck. They believed it. Men have hair politics, too. Long locks suggest youth and strength, think knights on horseback, wind in their mane. But too long. That's vain. Or French. Or both. Monks often go bald in a ring-shaped tonsure, supposedly to mirror Christ's crown of thorns, but really it just looks like a bad haircut blessed by theology. And beards? Those are a whole topic. Some styles are in, others are heretical. A clean shave might suggest piety, or cowardice. A heavy beard might say wisdom or rebellion. It's all about context. And facial structure, here's a fun one. There's a medieval belief that a woman's hair contains her essence, her personality, her spirit, even her fertility. In some marriage rituals, a lock of hair is cut and given to the groom as a symbol of trust and belonging. In others, it's burned after death to keep the soul from lingering. Hair, in short, is never just hair, and if someone steals a lock of it, that's practically witchcraft. It can be used in love spells, curses, fertility charms. You've heard stories, some whispered, some shouted, of girls who lost part of their hair and then lost their luck. Whether you believe it or not, you sleep with your braid wrapped and pinned. Veils, meanwhile, do more than hide. They perform. A fine veil says, I have money. A heavy veil says, I have modesty. A colored veil, blue for virgins, white for brides, black for mourning, signals your whole emotional wardrobe. And of course, the longer and more embroidered the edge, the more people assume your dowry was impressive. There's a story of a merchant's wife who wore a veil so long it had to be carried behind her. She said it was for modesty. Everyone else said it was a tax write-off. Either way, it worked. People noticed. Quirky tidbit time. In parts of medieval Spain, hair was believed to trap evil spirits. So before weddings, a priest might bless the bride's braid to release the tempters. You're not sure if it worked, but you've definitely seen grooms go pale watching the ritual. You sometimes dream of cutting it all off. Feeling the breeze on your scalp. Walking through the market without being assessed, coded, translated. But that would be dramatic. Dangerous. Deviant. A shaved woman without a habit is either ill, punished, or deranged. That's how narrow the definitions are. Still, you sneak small rebellions. A braid undone after dark. A headscarf loosened at the river. A moment where your hair touches your shoulders and reminds you of who you were before they told you what to do with it, and you're not alone. In every town, there's someone whose veil is always slightly crooked. Someone who pins her hair too high or lets her fringe sneak back in. Someone quietly redefines what's allowed, not by shouting, but by simply showing up, day after day, with her hair her own, so you do the dance. You comb. You cover. You tuck. But in the privacy of your thoughts, you remember, hair grows back. And so do you, and yet. Hair refuses to behave. It escapes pins. It curls in the rain. It tangles when you sleep. It refuses to be tamed, even when everything else about your life is strictly monitored, your posture, your skirt hem, your speech. Maybe that's why it matters so much. Because it's the one thing that keeps growing. Quietly. Persistently. A small rebellion on your scalp. There are stories, too, of miracles involving hair. Saints whose locks glowed in the dark. Martyrs whose hair remained intact after fire. One tale tells of a young woman imprisoned for her faith whose hair grew so long and thick it wrapped around her like a robe, shielding her from the guards. Whether or not it's true doesn't matter. The symbolism is clear. Holiness isn't just internal, it can grow from your very skin. Hair has memories. It holds scent, smoke, and sunlight. It changes with age and stress and childbirth. You can shear it off in grief or let it grow in defiance. And every time you lift your veil at night and shake it loose, you are reminded, this part of you is still yours, not a symbol. Not a message. Just strands. Just self. You smile, and instantly regret it, because smiles, in this world, aren't charming unless you've got the teeth to match, and most people don't. Teeth like pearls. A fantasy. Something poets write into their verses and painters dab onto altar panels. In real life, it's more teeth like river pebbles, or teeth like the battlements of a half-collapsed tower. Jagged. Discolored. Occasionally missing, but that doesn't mean they're not noticed. On the contrary, teeth are scrutinized. Judged. Gossiped about. A clean, well-formed mouth can mean good breeding, good health, even divine favor. Meanwhile, a crooked grin might mark you as cursed, poor, or, worst of all, unsanitary. You've probably never owned a toothbrush. But everyone expects your mouth to look like you do. You once watched a girl cover her mouth with her hand when laughing at a feast. It wasn't modesty, it was strategy. She'd broken a front tooth falling from a hay cart, and even though it had healed, the gap had earned her a new nickname. She never laughed openly again. In noble courts, whiteness is prized. Not just fair skin, fair teeth. A pale smile signals purity, wealth, and access to things like imported spices and sugar. Ironically, the people who can afford sugar the most are also the ones most likely to rot their teeth with it. But in the early medieval centuries, sugar is still rare enough to feel luxurious rather than dangerous. The rot hasn't quite caught up to the symbolism. Instead, people try to whiten what they've got. With ashes. With crushed sage. With ground-up pumice stone, if you're feeling extra. Some recipes include powdered coral or even vinegar rinses. Do they work? A little. Do they burn your gums? Definitely. But the goal isn't comfort, it's presentation. You hear a traveling merchant brag that his wife's teeth are whiter than monastery candles. You also notice he keeps rubbing his jaw, probably from an aching molar. That's the truth hiding behind all this. Teeth hurt. Constantly. Quietly. Without antibiotics or fillings or decent tools, pain is simply part of the package. You know people who have teeth pulled with pliers heated over the hearth. No numbing. Just bite down on leather and scream into a cloak. Afterward, if you're lucky, you get to swish wine and sleep for a week. If you're not, the socket gets infected and the swelling spreads. People die from toothaches here. No one writes poems about that. Still, appearance matters. Rotten teeth aren't just a medical issue, they're a moral one. A mouth full of decay might suggest gluttony, sin, or even demonic influence. The devil enters through the rot, someone once told you. You don't know if they meant spiritually or literally. Maybe both. Historians still argue whether dental hygiene was actually worse in the Middle Ages or whether we're just judging by exaggerated art and rare remains. But you've seen enough mouths to guess, no one here is smiling out of joy. They're smiling because they have to. Because showing teeth can be a tool. A weapon. A way of saying, look, I belong. Because even in portraits, teeth make an appearance. Carefully. Subtly. Most faces are closed-lipped, serene. But sometimes, a painter includes the hint of an upper row, a few smooth, white dots. An expensive flourish. Almost always false, you once helped prepare a noblewoman for her wedding. Her breath was sweetened with clove and mint. Her teeth had been scrubbed raw that morning with crushed rosemary. Her maid told her to smile only if absolutely necessary. Better mysterious than gappy, she said. The noblewoman nodded. She looked sick. Not with nerves, with pain, that's another secret of the era, breath. No one talks about it, but everyone notices it. A foul mouth can ruin a first impression, a marriage negotiation, even a confession. You carry mint leaves in your satchel, not for flavor, but for survival. You chew parsley after meals. You swish wine when you can. Water is suspect, but wine burns just enough to feel clean. You've heard of herbal mouth rinses passed down through generations, sage boiled in vinegar. Thyme steeped in salt water, powdered fennel seeds rubbed on the tongue. Not luxury items. Just defense, and then there's tooth shape. In some regions, small, even teeth are the goal. In others, a prominent pair of front teeth suggests good lineage. There's even a belief in parts of France that a small gap in the top teeth is lucky, it lets your soul speak more freely. You try not to laugh when you hear that one. Mostly because you're still nursing a sore molar, men are judged, too. A warrior with all his teeth intact is considered both lucky and disciplined, able to afford a good diet, smart enough not to bite into metal, lucky enough to avoid infection. A priest with yellowed teeth might be forgiven, it's assumed he fasts often. But a merchant? A scribe? A bard? No excuses. You're supposed to look refined. Clean. Presentable, quirky tidbit time. In 13th century Germany, there were love charms that involved biting an apple, whispering a name into it, then burying it near the person's door. Supposedly, the charm worked better if the person had white and straight teeth. Go figure, but what about those who lose teeth entirely? Dentures, in this period, are rare and horrifying. Sometimes carved from bone. Sometimes made with real human teeth, usually stolen from corpses or purchased quietly from the desperate. They don't fit well. They fall out. They cause sores. But if you're rich and vain enough, you try. One nobleman had a silver mouthpiece made to replace his missing front teeth. It clinked when he spoke. People were too afraid to laugh, for most, though, loss is permanent. You learn to chew differently. You learn to hide your mouth when speaking. You smile with your eyes instead. You stop being beautiful in the way people mean it, unless, of course, you're charming. Because every rule has its exceptions. There are people who are so witty, so magnetic, so unbothered by their appearance that they become beautiful through force of will. A missing tooth becomes a signature. A crooked grin becomes a legend. You once met a woman with 2 teeth left who told better stories than anyone else in the village. She laughed loudly. No one cared what was missing, still, you try. You chew carefully. You avoid hard nuts and bones. You eat soup more often. You save up for sage leaves and brush with willow bark. You rinse with wine and hope, because somewhere deep down, you want to be able to smile without flinching. You want someone to look at you and see not the gaps, not the stains, not the pain, but the effort. The person underneath. The survivor, and maybe that's the real beauty here, not in the illusion of perfect teeth, but in the resilience of the people who carry on, laughing anyway. But the mouth never really rests, does it? Even in silence, it's observed. The way your lips twitch when you're anxious. The way a single tooth peeks out when you pronounce certain words. There's always someone watching, maybe a merchant appraising your value in a crowded square, or a matchmaker squinting through the candlelight. You've seen it happen. A woman opens her mouth to speak and the room subtly recoils, not because of what she says, but because her smile reveals more gum than grace. You've learned to talk behind your hand. To laugh with your lips pressed closed. To chew on one side to avoid the sharp ache on the other. It's an elaborate dance, and no one teaches it. You pick it up like calluses, from repetition and necessity, and yet, teeth are used in flirtation. Bold smiles across feast tables. Biting into fruit just so. Whispered words close enough to feel the breath. There's risk in it, real physical risk, but there's also reward. The few who have dazzling teeth know it. They flaunt it like a sword, sharp, rare, and deeply envied. One girl in your village had a full set of white, straight teeth. Everyone called her Lily Mouth. She smiled constantly, not out of joy, but power. She got the best offers. The cleanest linens. The second best goose at the harvest feast. But she never married. Some said she was too proud. Others said she was cursed. You always thought she simply understood the value of what she had, and wouldn't give it away to anyone who only wanted the surface. You remember a feast where someone tried to compare smiles. People actually leaned in, lifted their chins, opened their mouths for inspection, laughing, mostly, but not entirely joking. It was brutal. You stayed in the corner and sipped broth, grateful for the candlelight and the dark ale that dulled your back molar. There's even superstition about teeth. Some believe a child born with a tooth already in their mouth is destined to rule, or ruin. Others think spitting after brushing with ash wards off curses. And when teeth fall out, they're sometimes buried under thresholds or thrown into the fire. You never leave yours where someone might find them. You've heard too many stories of love spells gone wrong, of curses whispered through missing molars. You once overheard an old woman say, "A clean mouth, a clean soul." You weren't sure if she meant it literally or not. But you still rinse with mint whenever you're near the well, because when you do smile, when the moment takes you, when something is truly funny or joyful or absurd, you want it to mean something. You want the world to see your whole self, not just your flaws. Not just your gaps, and maybe one day, they will. Maybe beauty won't be about hiding, about scrubbing and aching and flinching in the mirror. Maybe it will be about smiling anyway, even with broken teeth, even through the pain, even when no one is looking. Your mirror is a bowl of cloudy water. You lean over it in the morning light, squinting at the shape of your own reflection, not looking for signs of health or illness. No. You're checking your eyebrows. Specifically, whether you've plucked them evenly. Because in your village, in your time, in this narrow sliver of the Middle Ages, beauty is not what nature gave you, it's what you carefully, painfully, and often dangerously remove or add. Let's start with hair, eyebrows. Thin is in. Very thin. Arched delicately if you're lucky, plucked into oblivion if you're not. A high, open forehead is a mark of aristocracy, of wisdom, of elegance. The phrase you've heard is a mind as wide as her brow. Women go so far as to remove not just the brows but also the hair along their hairline, inching it back until the forehead seems to stretch like parchment. You've tried it. It hurts. It also leaves you with a faint rash that lasts 2 days. But when you veil yourself just right, it creates the illusion of a smooth, high dome of skin that makes the village boys stare. The irony. The same people who praise your refined forehead are the ones who whispered that you looked like a startled goose last week when you went too far with the tweezers. Fashion is fickle, then there's padding. Let's not pretend that medieval beauty is only about face and skin. Body shape matters too, especially among the nobility. And the standards? Surprisingly specific. Softness equals wealth. Round cheeks, wide hips, a stomach that speaks of frequent feasts. Thinness, unless you're a monk or recently widowed, isn't the goal, it's suspicious. Hunger is the curse of the poor, and no one wants to look like they're one meal away from collapse, so what do you do if you're lean by nature? You fake it, you pad, under your linen dress, you might tie bundles of wool around your hips to widen your silhouette. You may even sew extra stuffing into your sleeves to give the illusion of softness. Plump arms are associated with health and good blood. There's a trick you learn from a traveling seamstress. A small roll of cloth tied under the bust can lift and exaggerate the chest, creating a fuller shape under layers of gown and chemise. It's subtle, strategic, ridiculous. But it works. You're still growing into your figure, but already you know how to play the game. A little weight? Lovely. Too much. Jokes about pigs and gluttony. You saw a girl called Lady Loaf for months after she gained a bit around the middle. She married a brewer, moved to another village, and came back glowing, dressed in soft velvet. Suddenly, everyone acted like they'd loved her all along. Beauty is a costume, and you're constantly auditioning. Now to the darker side, poison. You wouldn't call it that, not out loud. But in the privacy of your thoughts, you know that some of the things women smear on their faces and rub into their scalps are anything but safe. Take lead, for example. A key ingredient in some of the best whitening pastes. It makes the skin smooth, pale, ghost-like. Also, it makes your teeth loosen, your hair fall out, and your skin blister. But slowly. Quietly. Elegantly. You've heard of belladonna drops, too. Deadly nightshade, they call it in the fields. But in court, it's used to dilate the pupils, create that wide-eyed, doe-like look that bards write verses about. 1 drop in each eye. Makes you look enchanted. Also makes you dizzy. Nauseated, and, if used too often, blind. Beauty is worth the risk, they say. Or at least, it better be, and then there's mercury. Used in certain ointments to remove spots or blemishes of the soul, as one pious apothecary called them. It stings. It scars. It kills. But it's sold in tiny, expensive jars and labeled with gold lettering, so it must be fine. You once saw a noblewoman whose skin looked like porcelain. Flawless. Ageless. But her hands trembled when she reached for a spoon, and her maid whispered that she hadn't eaten in days. That her gums bled at night. That her hair came out in handfuls. Still, people called her beautiful. Reverently. As if suffering were part of the package. You don't have access to those kinds of poisons. Not really. You use crushed petals. Maybe some vinegar. A paste made of almond and egg. But you think about it. You wonder, because every time you walk through the market, someone prettier walks past. Not prettier because of birth or smile, but because they dared more. Risked more. Endured more. Even your shoes are part of it, long-toed slippers. Impractical. Often stuffed with wool to keep their ridiculous shape. One time you tripped and spilled a basket of apples trying to keep your toes from bending. Everyone laughed. But no one questioned whether you looked fashionable. In Florence and Venice, platforms are in. Wooden soles stacked several inches high. To walk in them is to declare, I do not need to run. I do not need to labor. I simply glide. You tried a pair once. Got blisters so bad you couldn't walk to church the next day. But they looked divine while they lasted. You also pluck other things. Unwanted hairs, yes, but also thoughts. Desires. You learn to silence parts of yourself that don't fit the image. You practice smiling when your back aches. You rehearse expressions in the reflective glass of the convent window. Modest delight. Thoughtful chastity. Ethereal detachment. There's a look women are expected to carry, like a second veil, and if you let it slip, you're immediately suspect. Too proud. Too wild. Too much. A woman should never seem to be trying to be beautiful. It should just happen, effortlessly, naturally, as if heaven itself reached down and gifted you the perfect brow, the perfect bosom, the perfect balance of silence and sweetness. Meanwhile, you've spent an hour tucking, pressing, pinching, and praying. Let's not forget the rituals. Before a feast, you bathe, if water's available. You rub your arms with cloth soaked in rosemary. You burn lavender in the room to mask the scent of too many people in too small a space. You braid your hair tight enough to hold all evening. You dab color into your cheeks, rose petal crushed and mixed with fat. It doesn't last, but it gives you 15 minutes of bloom before it fades into sweat. You wear your best linen. Not the scratchy one, the soft one you've kept wrapped in herbs under the bed. You pin a sprig of basil into your braid. Someone once told you it makes you look pure. You stand by the table and you smile. Not too wide. Not too long. Just enough. Someone offers you a plum. You bite it. Slowly. Elegantly. You feel the juice slide down your chin, panic slightly, then remember, sensuality is still allowed, in small, contained doses. As long as you pretend not to notice, that's the final trick, you can be beautiful. As long as it looks accidental, you can be clever. As long as you giggle afterward, you can pluck, pad, poison, and pose. Just don't admit it, because beauty is power here, and power in a woman must always be disguised. You've been written about before you've even lived, long before you spoke your first word, someone had already decided what you were supposed to be. Not by name, no, that would be too specific. But by type. By silhouette. By the outline of a lady in the margins of a knight's poem. The kind who leans out from castle windows, sighing into the wind. The kind who blushes but never burps. Who faints gracefully. Who weeps silently into monogrammed linen. You are the ideal lady, but only in theory, in practice. You're sweaty. You have opinions. Your laugh snorts on bad days. You stub your toe while fetching eggs. You get splinters in your thumbs and lint in your veil. You are, in short, a person. Which is not the same thing at all, but try telling that to the songs. Everywhere you go, someone's humming a ballad about a fair maiden whose heart is purer than spring water and whose face could shame the moon. She's gentle, shy, and impossibly good at embroidery. She loves a knight with zero flaws, and he loves her back because she's beautiful and passive and never once interrupts him while he's talking about horses, and this, somehow, has become the model. The knight's lady is pale, soft, clean-smelling, somehow, and always watching from the sidelines. She doesn't sweat. She doesn't spit. She certainly doesn't argue about church taxes. Her hands are white and useless. Her thoughts are never political. Her main task is to inspire, and if she dies tragically, even better. There's something particularly poetic about a beautiful woman dying young in the name of honor, or chastity, or mysterious illness. Poets love that. Knights especially love that. A dead lady can't contradict your version of her. She just stays perfect forever. You've heard the songs, one about a lady who waited 7 years for her crusader knight to return. She lived in a tower and only ate bread and tears. When he came back and found her asleep, he kissed her and she died instantly from happiness. People weep at that one. Meanwhile, you're sitting there thinking, wouldn't she have died of scurvy first? But try saying that out loud. People don't want logic. They want longing. And so you keep quiet. Smile. Pretend you're honored to be compared to the idea of a woman who didn't speak for 7 years. You once dated, well, courted, a would-be knight. He brought you a squirrel pelt and a poem. The pelt still had a bit of blood on it. The poem was about your eyes. Apparently, they were like 2 trembling pawns of dusk. You asked what that meant. He frowned and told you not to ruin it. That's the problem with ideals, they don't like being questioned. Historians still argue whether chivalry was ever actually followed. Or just a flowery cover for political maneuvering in heavy armor. But what's undeniable is this, its image of women stuck. Deeply. Irrationally, you're supposed to be the reward. Not the fighter. Not the strategist. Not the person holding the family together through drought and plague. Just the trophy. Quiet. Decorated. Unscarred, quirky tidbit, in some knightly traditions, tournaments included a queen of beauty who would award the prize to the winner. This queen wasn't selected for her governance or intelligence, just looks. Sometimes she was 12. Sometimes she was 30. Always lovely. Always silent during the speeches. You try to imagine being that woman. Sitting on a dais. Watching men bash each other with poles. Smiling while covered in rose petals and boredom. It's not that you dislike attention, it's that it's all so specific. The ideal lady isn't allowed to have a toothache. Or a favorite goat. Or a dirty joke she tells by the well. She exists for display, and yet, here's the strange thing, sometimes you want to be her, not forever. Just for an hour. You want to wear the velvet gown. You want to sit by a window and sip wine and be looked at like you're a dream. You want to be sung about. Even if the song gets your name wrong. Even if they say your eyes are sky-colored when they're clearly brown. It would be nice, for once, to be noticed for something other than your milking skills, but you know the cost. To be the lady in the song, you have to give up yourself. No more sarcasm. No more arguing with your brother about planting dates. No more rolling your eyes when the priest says women were made from Adam's spare rib. You can't roll your eyes in a song, still, you try pieces of it. You walk slowly through the courtyard. You braid your hair in the style of a duchess you've only heard stories about. You sit by the hearth with a book you can't read, just to look like a woman with quiet depth. A merchant passes and calls you graceful. Your ankle is sprained from tripping over the dog 5 minutes ago, but still, you smile. The knight's ideal lady is always being watched, that's the part they never tell you in the songs. She's watched when she walks. When she eats. When she laughs. Her virtue is public property. If she's too friendly, she's dangerous. If she's too distant, she's cold. She's expected to inspire, to soothe, to accept admiration without complaint, and flirtation without consequence. It's a tightrope. And the fall is brutal, one wrong rumor. You're no longer the maiden with eyes like winter rain. You're the girl who let a squire carry her basket. You're gossip. You're spoiled goods, that's why some girls fake shyness. Or reel it into existence. Better to be called boring than bold. Better to be passed over than paraded, but not all women play along. You've met a few who twist the script. One wore her hair loose and laughed with her teeth showing. People said she'd never marry. She married twice. Another girl refused to sing during church and still got invited to the harvest ball. It's not easy. You have to be twice as clever to get half the approval. But it's possible, and sometimes, you use the image of the knight's lady for your own gain. When it suits you. When pretending to be innocent gets you out of trouble. When acting wide-eyed convinces someone to give you the better price. You weaponize their fantasy. It feels both gross and delicious, and then there are the women knights don't write about. The mothers. The midwives. The ones who dig graves and milk cows and brew beer strong enough to knock a man out. The ones who pray silently and work loudly. Who don't wear veils unless they want to. Who don't need songs because they already have stories. You like those women best, because they see through the illusion. They know the night's ideal lady is just that, idealized. An image without elbows. A shadow without a voice. Something to pin to a wall and admire. Not something to live as. You want to be more than that. You want to be remembered correctly. You want your name, your laugh, your actual face, not the one made up in someone else's verse. Not a fair maid of unknown birth, but you, the girl with the calloused hands. The chipped tooth. The brain that notices everything. You're not a window ornament. You're the wind outside, but the trouble with wind is that it's hard to catch, and even harder to name. Still, they try. Men with lutes. Scribes with ink-stained fingers. They chase you with metaphors, pinning your existence to lilies, doves, and other soft, silent things. She was as gentle as a breeze across the barley. One line says, "You were there. You remember that day. You weren't gentle, you were furious. The miller's son had taken your spindle and blamed it on a dog, and you'd shouted so loud the geese scattered. Funny how that didn't make the song. There's a deep hunger in these tales, for purity, for beauty, for women who exist without inconvenience. It's not just about admiration. It's about control. The night's ideal lady is always out of reach but never truly outside the system. She's elevated, yes, but only because she never talks back. You wonder sometimes. Do they even like real women, or just the idea of being admired by one? You test this when you speak plainly. When you point out that you're not interested in being someone's soft dream. When you say, "I have a blister the size of a walnut and I'm still hauling firewood, so maybe I'm the heroic one here." Some laugh. Some bristle. Some stop talking to you altogether, but one day, a boy at the well says, "You don't act like the ladies in stories." You brace for insult, then he says, "Good." They sound boring. You carry that one around like a secret treasure. Because even in a world obsessed with the ideal, there are cracks in the walls. People who are tired of perfect. People who like loud girls. Brown-eyed girls. Girls with opinions and ink stains and hands strong from lifting pails. People who want you, so you keep pretending, when it helps. You keep dodging, when it's safer. You keep listening to the songs, nodding at the lyrics, while quietly rewriting the melody in your head, because someday, someone might write a ballad about you, not the imagined you, the real one, and when they do, you hope they get the part right where you said no, and meant it. You're not supposed to look fashionable, at least, not intentionally. You're a peasant girl, remember? Dirt under your nails. Hem soaked in dew. Hands raw from scrubbing turnips or hauling buckets. No one expects you to care about beauty trends, let alone start them, and yet, somehow, you do, because there's a secret no one in the manor wants to admit. The nobility watches closely. They sneer at your patched sleeves, your muddy skirts, your berry-stained lips, and then, weeks later, you catch the lady of the estate trying to replicate the exact shade with imported rose wax and beetroot. Suddenly it's the height of court fashion. They call it natural charm. You call it what it is, copying. You don't wear silk. You can't afford glass buttons or scented soaps or Italian veils. But you've got wildflowers. You've got soft linen dyed with onion skins. You've got eyes sharp enough to notice which herbs leave a pleasant scent on your skin after you've bathed in a river. You tie your hair back with a strip of old wool and somehow make it look poetic. A visiting monk once described the women in your village as earthy and unconsciously elegant. You didn't know what he meant at the time. You were 12, chasing geese and swearing at your brother. But now, when you bend over to pull weeds and feel the sun on your back, you wonder if maybe he wasn't just being poetic, maybe he was being jealous. Because unlike the fine ladies in castles, you wear your beauty comfortably. Not for display. Not for approval. It's part of you. Like freckles. Or calluses. The truth is, peasant chic was a thing long before it had a name. You've seen noblewomen wear smocks modeled after the ones you use for gathering firewood, only theirs are cut from linen so fine it wrinkles if you even think about moving. You once saw a lady at mass wearing a hat made entirely of woven straw. You and your friends exchanged looks. You'd made that same hat to keep the sun off your nose. While planting beets last summer. It had fallen apart in a week. Hers probably cost 5 shillings and had a feather stuck in it for flair. You're not flattered, you're amused, because they'd never last a day in your dress. The weight of wet wool after a storm. The smell of smoke in your shawl. The way your skirts stiffen with mud and then crackle when they dry. They want the look, but not the labor. They want the village girl vibe, but not the frostbitten toes or the bruises on your hip from carrying firewood. Historians still argue whether rural women actually cared about style or if that's a modern projection. But you know the truth. You care. Everyone does. Maybe not in the same way. Maybe not with perfume and portraits. But you know which scarf makes your cheeks look pinker. Which apron still holds a trace of lavender from last month's wash. Which pair of shoes doesn't squeak like a dying duck when it rains. You trade secrets with other girls. Not just gossip, but fashion hacks. One tells you rubbing sage on your temples brings out your eye color. Another swears by scrubbing your lips with salt to make them look redder. You test both. They sort of work. But mostly, it's the confidence they bring. You feel seen. Even if it's just by the hens. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, especially in spring, young women pluck the earliest nettles and rub them along their arms, not for punishment, but to encourage color in the skin. It tingled. It was itchy. But it left a flush that made them look blessed by health. You tried it once. It worked, and also made your forearms swell like sausages for 2 days. You decided one pinch of feverfew did the job better. There's also the seasonal switch. Your winter look is layers. Wool on wool. Your figure disappears under practicality. But in summer, suddenly you're glowing. The sun catches your cheekbones. Your arms are bare and sun-kissed. Your hair goes light at the ends. You roll your sleeves and look up. From the fields and someone gasps, not because you're trying, because you're alive. There's a flirtation to working outside. You stretch. You sigh. You smear a bit of clay on your cheek without realizing it, and someone across the path decides you're breathtaking. It's not about cleanliness. It's about vitality. The village tailor once joked that no man falls in love at church. It always happens while watching someone carry water uphill. You believe him, because you've seen the way people look at each other in work clothes. You've seen girls plait flowers into their braids while idly feeding pigs. You've seen boys flex harder than necessary when hammering fence posts. You've seen widows let their shawls slip just enough to show the fine bones of their neck. This isn't vanity, this is survival. Beauty, even unspoken, is currency, and the best part. You don't need permission to participate. In the manor house, someone tells you how to dress, how to sit, how to carry your knife. But in the field, you tie your skirts however you like. You kick off your shoes and let the dirt stain your heels. You walk tall. Your body moves the way it wants to, not the way someone trained it to move. You remember the harvest dance last year. You wore a dress 3 girls had already outgrown. The hem was uneven. The neckline had been stitched by a blind uncle. But you added a belt made from braided horsehair and tied rosemary into your braid. You danced barefoot. You smiled until your cheeks hurt, and that night, everyone said you were the most beautiful girl there, not because your dress was fine, because you looked like joy. You looked like someone who knew what it meant to survive winter. To smell bread baking. To feel sweat on your spine and still laugh like nothing else mattered. You don't want to be a lady with shoes so delicate she can't walk across the grass. You want to be this, someone who runs, who stains, who glows. There's power in that. And sometimes, envy. You once caught a noble woman staring at you during a festival. She was dressed like a painting, silk, gold threads, a necklace that could pay for half your village. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. She watched you sip cider and laugh with your cousin, and she didn't look judgmental, she looked hungry. For something real, for a body that knew the weight of apples. For feet that knew the shape of the earth. You don't need her life, not really, you've got cracked hands and freedom. You've got a scarf that smells like thyme and a bruise on your shin from climbing a tree. You've got lips that remember laughter better than prayers, you've got a style no one taught you. And that makes it entirely yours, but still, you play with the idea, just a little, not because you're trying to be someone else, but because dressing up feels good. There's power in transformation, even when the fabric's cheap and the mirror is a polished plate. You once found a bit of ribbon in the dust near the manor stables, blue, frayed at one end, probably tossed aside by some noble girl who had 10 more like it. You took it home and washed it, tucked it into your braid the next market day. Everyone noticed, and no one mocked you, they just smiled and said you looked ready for something. You didn't know what. But the ribbon made your chin lift higher. Made your hands feel lighter. You wear beauty like a secret, shared only with those who notice the way your sleeves are rolled just right, the way your skirt swings when you step through wet grass. You don't need jewels. You need sun and wind and a little imagination, because that's the thing, when you grow up with so little, you learn to notice more, how the evening light makes your brown eyes look gold. How the outline of your collarbone catches dust like powdered shimmer. How a bit of ash from the fire rubbed into your lashes makes them stand out just enough to make the baker's son stare a little too long. You're not trying to be noble, you're trying to be you, but brighter, more awake. More alive, and when you walk down the path in your patched dress, your fingers trailing over tall grass, your feet steady and sure, you feel beautiful, not because anyone said so, but because you believe it, and once you do, the rest of the world tends to follow. It's your fault, you know, the way he looked at you. Your fault. The way she glared. Your fault, too. The drought, the bad harvest, the merchant who lost his way, all of it, if you happen to look too proud, too bright, or too lovely at the wrong time, you don't remember signing up to be a scapegoat, but beauty in the Middle Ages often comes with a target. You were never just admired. You were accused, someone's cow dies mysteriously. You wore red last week, the baker's son catches a fever. You were seen brushing your hair under a full moon, a child goes missing, or worse, a man returns from war with his sanity in pieces, and suddenly, every woman who has ever dared to be striking becomes suspect. Beauty stops being something to celebrate. It becomes something to blame. You've seen it happen. First comes the compliment. You're too pretty for this village. Then the warning. You'll bring trouble if you don't cover up. Then the punishment. A pulled braid. A cold shoulder. A whisper in church. A rock through a window. Historians still argue whether beauty was ever truly protective in medieval times. On the one hand, noblewomen were painted like saints, immortalized in manuscript gold. On the other, peasant girls with flushed cheeks were more likely to be accused of witchcraft than crowned with flowers. A pretty face could earn favor, or fire, it all depends on who's looking, and why. You learn quickly that attention isn't neutral. A glance lingers a little too long. You lower your eyes. A priest mentions Eve's temptation during the sermon. You tug your shawl higher, even if it's 80 degrees. The burden of modesty is yours to bear. And if you fail, if a man stares too long, or a girl feels inadequate standing beside you, the sin is yours, too. You once wore a blue dress. Just blue. It had been dyed with crushed berries and took weeks to get the stains even. You were proud. It made your skin glow. Someone said you were asking for it. You didn't know what it was until later. But you knew it wasn't a compliment. That same afternoon, the priest's wife pulled you aside and gave you a scarf. A brown one. Rough. She smiled tight and said, "This is safer." Safe from what? The breeze, your own shoulders, or the possibility that someone might want what they can't have and decide that's your crime. Quirky fact, in certain towns, women were fined for immodest display, a category so vague it could include exposed ankles, bright colors, or even too much laughter. One girl was punished for having hair like fire. Another for swaying while walking. As if gravity was her fault, but there's a deeper fear beneath all this. It's not your body that terrifies them, it's your influence. Beauty means people look. And when they look, they listen. You say, "That man is cruel," and suddenly others see it too. You say, "This rule is wrong," and they start to question. Your face draws the crowd. Your words shift it, so they try to silence you before you speak, and the easiest way to do that? Make your beauty a threat. That's why you've heard phrases like ruinous charm or sinful smile. Why poets romanticize women as devils in disguise. Why old men say, "She'll be trouble when she grows up," with a mix of awe and resentment. It's exhausting. You begin to view your reflection as something volatile. Like fire. Or lightning. Not safe, not sacred, but dangerous. Untrustworthy, and yet, you still want to be beautiful, not to seduce. Not to deceive. But to reclaim, to say, "This is mine. This face, this body, this skin. Not a weapon. Not a curse. Just a part of you that refuses to shrink." You remember your mother once covering your mouth mid-laugh and whispering, "Not so loud. Pretty girls shouldn't show their teeth." You were 8, since then, you've practiced the quiet smile. The folded hands. The gentle walk. All of it designed to lessen you. To disarm you. To make others feel more comfortable in your presence by pretending you're not as vivid as you are. But now, you're tired of folding yourself in half just to make someone else feel whole. You want to laugh. Loudly. You want to walk like you're not apologizing to the earth for taking up space, and so you begin small rebellions, a red ribbon instead of brown. A song hummed while drawing water, a straight glance at the butcher who always stares too long. This time, you stare back. No more hiding, because the blame is a trick. A cage made of words. And the only way out is to stop believing it belongs to you. Let them say you're dangerous. Let them whisper you're too much. You've been their excuse long enough. Time to be your own reason. But the thing about blame is, it sticks even when you wash it off, even when you wrap yourself in dull fabric. Even when you speak softly, step carefully, agree readily. You could scrub your skin until it's raw, pluck your lashes bald, bite your tongue until it tastes of iron, and still someone would find something about you to fault. Maybe it's your voice. Too steady. Maybe it's your posture. Too proud. Maybe it's just that you were born with a face someone once wanted and didn't get to touch, because sometimes, blame isn't even about what you did. It's about how visible you are. There was a girl in your village, not stunning, not bold, but tall and quiet and too clever for her age. She had freckles on her collarbones and a way of speaking that made people lean in. One day, the mayor's nephew fell off his horse and cracked a rib. He'd been staring at her when it happened. Just her. Standing there with a basket of herbs. And before the dust had even settled, someone muttered, "Witch." Not accident. Not bad saddle. Just her name and that awful word. She wasn't a witch, but she left 2 nights later and no one saw her again, so you learn to dim yourself. You speak around things. You tuck compliments into silence, in case they're too loud. You never say thank you when someone calls you beautiful, not out of humility, but out of fear. As if agreeing makes it worse. As if ownership of your own face is an act of war, and isn't that the crux of it? Your face doesn't belong to you. Not really. It belongs to the village. The priest. The men in the tavern. The midwives. The gossips. Everyone has a say in what your beauty means, what it permits, what it invites. But what if beauty invited nothing? What if it simply was, no warnings? No punishments. Just a face that glows in the firelight and doesn't get dissected afterward. It's hard to imagine. You picture yourself walking through the village square with your hair down, your shoulders bare, your mouth unafraid. No fingers pointing. No muttering behind closed shutters. No priest veering his sermon into sudden metaphors about temptation, just being, just existing in your own skin. You once overheard an old woman say, "She walks like she doesn't know she's pretty." That's dangerous. And you thought, why does knowledge make it dangerous? You know why, because a woman who knows her power is harder to control, a beautiful woman who is also aware. That's when they panic. That's when they start using words like corrupting and brazen and curse. That's when they stop praising you and start circling like dogs, unsure whether to worship you or ruin you. So you choose neither. You choose yourself, not their compliments. Not their accusations. Just your own image, reflected in water, smudged by wind, and still yours. You begin to unlearn the guilt. You remember that your shoulders are just shoulders, your lips are just lips, your beauty is not a prophecy or a threat, it's not bait, it's not a mask, it's not anything more than a part of you, as natural as your laugh, as honest as your hunger, as changeable as the sky, and once that settles in your bones, blame starts to bounce off, not always. Some days still sting. But slowly, the fear drains out of the fabric. Slowly, you stop apologizing for your face. You stop hiding behind dust-colored scarves and downcast glances. You start looking back, not to invite. Not to defy, just to exist, fully, and for the first time in your life, you feel clean, not scrubbed raw, not forgiven. Just. Never guilty to begin with, you keep it in a pouch tied under your skirts, not because it's shameful. Not exactly. But because if someone found it, really found it, they'd have questions. Uncomfortable ones. Maybe you'd be scolded. Maybe fined. Maybe worse. It depends on who's doing the finding, and what mood they're in. Because technically, it's contraband. Not poisons. Not knives. But powders. Pigments. Bottled defiance. Welcome to the world of medieval makeup, where every stain of color is a quiet rebellion. You didn't start with much. A bit of crushed elderberry for the lips. Some ash for lashes. Watered down vinegar to brighten the eyes, whatever that means. You learned early that nothing is just one thing. A berry is food and dye. Clay is for pots and cheeks. A mortar and pestle are tools for both medicine and glamour, depending on the intent, and intent, as always, is the problem, because beauty is allowed, but not created. You're supposed to have it, not craft it. Heaven help you if you're caught trying to improve what God gave you. That's vanity. That's sin. That's pride in a skirt. And pride, as you know, is the devil's perfume, so the things you carry stay hidden, a scrap of linen rubbed with chalk dust, good for pale cheeks. A dab of goose fat mixed with crushed rose petals, a soot-smeared stick for brows. Don't ask where you got the stick. The chimney won't miss it, even your mirror is suspicious. Polished metal, slightly warped. Makes your left eye look a little higher than the right. But it's enough to see what needs fixing. Or more precisely, what needs faking, because that's the game, right? To look natural, but better, to appear untouched while secretly touched by everything, mortar bowls, burned pots, dead flowers. Historians still argue whether medieval women widely used cosmetics or whether that's just later gossip written backward. But you know what you've seen. You know what you've done, late at night. Hunched near a rushlight, mixing yolk and saffron into a paste and hoping it won't stain your fingers permanently. There's danger in it, and that's part of the thrill, not just physical danger, though yes, some recipes are poisonous. You heard of a girl who tried to lighten her skin with a Venetian wash and woke up with boils. Another's teeth turned gray from too much alum. But the real risk is social, because paint is seen as deceit, and no one likes a woman who fools the eye, unless, of course, she's rich. Then it's not deceit, it's decorum. You've seen it, a noble woman with cheeks like polished apples, lips redder than pomegranate seeds, eyes lined in charcoal. Everyone knows it's artificial. But no one says a word. Because she's rich. Because she's allowed to maintain illusions. You, on the other hand, you wear too much and suddenly you're a temptress. A liar. A woman who wants something. A woman who might deserve what comes next, so you learn restraint, a smudge, not a swipe. A suggestion, not a statement. You perfect the art of looking like you aren't trying. Which, of course, takes twice the effort. Quirky tidbit, in some convents, powdered rice flour was banned, but not mashed lilies, so enterprising nuns used the latter to whiten their faces. Without breaking the rules. One abbess allegedly used ground pearls, claiming it was for skin ailments. You don't have pearls. But flour and chalk. Easy, and still, it's not just about wanting to look good, it's about control, about taking back the one part of yourself no one else should get to dictate. They control your clothes, your hours, your prayers, your name, but not your face. That's yours. And if you want to line your eyes like an Egyptian queen, no one can stop you. Well, they can. But only if they catch you, so it becomes a kind of game. A covert operation. You mix your lip tint while pretending to knead dough. You rub berry juice on your cheeks under the guise of shooing away flies. You wet your lashes at the well so they stick together in pretty points. You pluck your brows by firelight, whispering prayers between every sting. You become your own alchemist, your own canvas, and somewhere in that careful ritual, between soot and saffron, you find something close to self-respect. You don't do it for men, let's get that clear. If anything, you undo it for men. Wipe it off before meals. Hide it when the blacksmith walks by. But for yourself, that little moment when your lips go from chapped to flushed. That's yours. Pure indulgence. A tiny, stubborn refusal to be dull. Of course, the church disapproves. Paint, they say, is a tool of the devil. A mask meant to seduce. To lure, to betray. They compare it to witchcraft. To false witness. To pride in disguise. You know the sermons, you've heard the priest thunder about Jezebel. About painted harlots. About how no pure woman needs rouge to please her husband. You'd like to ask him what he uses to make his face look like boiled ham every Sunday. But you don't. You bite your tongue and lower your gaze, even though you know he's wrong. You've read Proverbs. You've heard about that virtuous woman whose lamp never goes out. Maybe she didn't wear lip tint. But maybe she did. Maybe she looked good and ran a household. Ever think of that? But arguing won't help, so you keep your tools hidden, a goose feather brush for your cheeks, a tin vial with crushed beetle wings for shimmer. Yes, real beetles. The color is incredible, a thumb-smudged compact of clay-stained wax, buried at the bottom of your satchel. They're small things. Almost laughable. But they make you feel sharp, clean, real, and sometimes powerful. You've watched a man falter mid-sentence because your mouth looked redder than he expected. You've watched a woman go quiet after realizing her own skin looked dull beside yours. You've walked into a market full of people who never once remembered your name, and left knowing they'd talk about that girl with the glowing cheeks. That's not sin, that's strategy, and it's yours, even if tomorrow you scrub it off with lye and pretend to be just another washed-out girl in a smock, even if no one ever admits you looked beautiful, even if you never tell anyone why your lips are stained just a little too pink. It's not about vanity, it's about agency. And in a world that keeps trying to erase you, every smudge of pigment is a mark of refusal. So tonight, you'll press a little more ash along your eyes, you'll tint your lips until they whisper something only you can hear, and you'll go out into the dusk not as a girl pretending to be plain, but as yourself, exactly as you choose to be seen, because your face isn't a sin. It's a statement, but maybe the boldest part isn't the color, it's the choice. You choose what gets highlighted and what stays shadowed. You choose what stories your face will tell before you've even spoken a word. Some days, it says, "Don't notice me." Other days, it whispers, "Try." And occasionally, on market days, festival nights, or just when the air smells like the world's listening, it declares, "Look. I'm here." There's nothing accidental about it. Not when the world insists your appearance is either accidental or dangerous. That you're either blessed by God or tempting the devil. There's no middle ground, no room for effort without suspicion, so when you mix crushed marigold petals into your cheek balm, you're not just brightening your face. You're committing a subtle act of rebellion. Against the pulpit. Against the gossips. Against the idea that you should be invisible unless someone else decides you're worth seeing. You remember what your aunt said once, in a voice so soft it might have been mistaken for a prayer. They say beauty fades, but so does fear. And I'd rather face both than live without either. She wasn't known for gentleness. Or modesty. She had a way of fixing her kerchief like it was armor and always wore a slash of color at her collarbone. Some said it was for attention. You know better. It was for memory. For control. For the feeling of choosing how she entered a room. You want that too, so maybe you never make a grand confession. Never stand in church and say, "I paint my face because I want to." But you don't have to. Your reflection already knows. And the girls around you, they know, too. You see it in the way they sneak glances at your mouth when you laugh, how their fingers twitch when they spot your tinted fingertips. They want the pouch. The potions. The autonomy, and one day, you'll share it. Not all at once. But piece by piece. A smear of pigment in a palm. A whispered recipe during laundry. A compact passed hand to hand beneath the grain sacks, because secrets this good shouldn't stay hidden, not forever. Let's not pretend the men were off the hook. Sure, they didn't have to rub crushed beetles on their cheeks or worry about accidentally seducing the devil with their hairline. But they weren't exactly rolling around in aesthetic freedom either. No, they had their own rigid codes of beauty, only theirs came with chainmail, blood oaths, and a lot of uncomfortable wool. You've seen it, the way young boys are taught to walk tall before they even know how to balance a sword. The way grown men inspect each other's jawlines like they're checking for rot. The way older men talk about honor with clenched teeth while sucking in their guts behind tightly laced belts, being a beautiful man in the Middle Ages. It was a high-stakes balancing act, just enough shine to look noble. Not so much that someone mistakes you for frivolous. There were rules. Oh, so many rules. Your hair. Long, but not too long, unless you were French, and even then, it depended on the century. Your beard. Trimmed to show discipline, or full and flowing to prove virility. But never patchy. Patchy meant you were cursed. Or worse, bad at taxes. Your clothes. Fitted, but not foppish. Your tunic had to hang just so, tight at the waist, flared at the hem, ideally hiding the fact that you hadn't bathed since Easter. Historians still argue whether medieval masculinity allowed room for vanity or if it was purely about strength and stoicism. The truth is, both. The knight might have been muddy and bloodied. But he also owned a mirror. Or a polished shield, which, let's be honest, is just a very expensive compact. You remember watching a squire agonize over his boots. He polished them with spit and sheep tallow for half an hour, cursing under his breath about dust demons. You offered him a rag. He blushed. That evening, he stood next to his lord looking exactly 1% shinier than usual. No one said a word. But he knew. And you knew. And that shine was his secret victory. Because beauty wasn't feminine. Not really. It was powerful, no matter who wielded it, still, there were limits. A man too obsessed with appearance might be seen as weak, even treacherous. The word effeminate wasn't just a jab, it was a loaded accusation. It meant untrustworthy. Deviant. Foreign. Men walked a razor's edge, trying to be admired without being noticed, and the consequences of falling off that edge. Brutal. Take the tale of Sir Eldrick, famously handsome, absurdly proud of his hair. According to the story, he brushed it 100 times each night and refused to wear a helmet in battle so he wouldn't flatten his waves. One day, an arrow took him square between the eyes. His death became a cautionary tale, vain men die dumb. You're not sure that's the lesson. Maybe don't go into battle without a helmet. But no, the moral they clung to was, beauty is dangerous for everyone. That's the quiet truth nobody says out loud. Medieval beauty standards hurt men too, they just did it differently. For women, beauty was demanded, and then punished. For men, it was permitted, but only if it proved something. Strength. Lineage. Morality. A man's good looks had to come with something: land, loyalty, a war story, a dead dragon. Otherwise, it was suspicious. Decorative. A waste. You once heard an older man hiss under his breath, too pretty to be trustworthy. About a traveling bard. The bard had clear skin and a melodic voice and wore a doublet that shimmered ever so slightly. Nothing scandalous. But enough to make people stare. Enough to draw side eyes from men who'd spent their whole lives being told rugged was righteous. Quirky tidbit: in some courts, men wore makeup too, subtly, of course. A touch of carmine on the lips. Powder to smooth the complexion. But it had to be disguised as health, not artifice. Rouge was fine if you called it hunting glow. A coal-smudged eye was fatigue from diplomacy. Vanity dressed in excuses. But underneath the justifications, desire, to be desired, to be seen, to feel something bloom behind the ribs when someone glances your way and looks again, and the most tragic part, they couldn't talk about it, not even to each other. You remember standing at the riverbank, watching 3 boys strip off their tunics before diving in. They joked loudly, shoved each other, pretended not to care. But every one of them stole glances, at their own bodies, at each other's. Not lust. Comparison. Measurement. Wondering, do I look right? Do I measure up? They wouldn't say it, but you saw it. You saw the way one adjusted his belt tighter after seeing another's waist. The way another pressed his hands against his abs when he thought no one was looking. The way they laughed too loudly when one mentioned ladies' favorites. It was all there, silent. Heavy. Sometimes, the burden of beauty isn't being judged. It's not being allowed to care, so the men retreat into their stories, of scars. Of hunts. Of battles won and body counts. But not about softness. Not about longing. Not about how terrifying it is to know your looks might matter, might help, might hurt, and still not be allowed to say you want them. You remember one boy, he must have been 15, who asked if his nose looked crooked. Quietly. Casually. Like it didn't matter, it mattered. He'd broken it falling from a cart and now he avoided mirrors. He thought it made him less likely to be chosen. Less heroic. You wanted to tell him the truth, that beauty is crooked noses and bad hair days and scars that caught the light in interesting ways. That stories lie when they say handsome is always symmetrical. But you just said, it suits you. He smiled like it almost helped, and maybe that's the secret, no one really fits the mold. Not knights. Not scribes. Not blacksmiths or bakers. Everyone's just trying, quietly, desperately, not to fall behind in a race no one admits exists, so the next time you see a man in a too tight tunic brushing lint from his shoulders like he's fighting invisible insects, you'll understand, he's not vain, he's scared, scared that his worth is melting. That youth is slipping. That someone will see him and not see enough, and so he straightens, he shaves. He flexes. He lowers his voice and raises his chin and pretends he didn't just spend 10 minutes smoothing his collar in the stream. Let him, because even if the world won't say it out loud, beauty matters to everyone, even the ones who claim it doesn't. But you know what's more painful than the fear? The loneliness. Men weren't supposed to talk about beauty, not their own, not anyone else's. Not unless it was in the form of a conquest. She was the fairest I'd ever seen, they'd say, like they were reciting a line from a bard's tale. But if they admired each other, or themselves, it had to be buried in code. Dismissed with a laugh. Hidden behind the brash noise of strength, and so they admired in silence. The knight might secretly envy the curve of the squire's cheekbone. The blacksmith might notice how his apprentice's curls catch the firelight. A merchant might linger too long in front of his polished windowpane, not fixing his cap but studying his jaw. But no one spoke it, because compliments between men were dangerous currency. You could joke about a man's beard, praise his sword arm, but tell him his smile was kind, his skin smooth, his walk elegant. Now you've crossed the line. Now you're suspicious. Now you've made beauty intimate, and intimacy is risky. There was a traveler once, passing through your town. He wore rings, 3 of them, all silver. His clothes were neat but worn, eyes sharp but tired. The local boys called him Lace Boy. Said it with a sneer, like the lace meant weakness. But he held his head high. You remember him brushing dust from his cuffs with fingers so precise they made everyone else seem like clumsy scarecrows. He didn't apologize for his softness, he didn't explain it, and for that, they hated him, because he was what they feared, a man unafraid to own his beauty. A man who didn't need to disguise grace as war readiness. You never saw him again, but weeks later, the boys who'd mocked him started shaving more often. Started brushing their hair differently. Started standing a little taller. They wouldn't admit it, but he'd left a mark. Not just on them, but on the idea of what a man could be, because beauty, when claimed without apology, is contagious. It doesn't always take rope to strangle a ribcage, sometimes it's just a sentence. A glance. A sigh. Or the slow, suffocating drip of rules so quiet they sound like your own thoughts. Because not every corset is worn under clothing, some are stitched into the brain. You feel it early, before you even know how to name it. A pause in someone's tone when they look at your shoulders. A well-meaning hand brushing your hair into a nicer shape. A sermon about humility where the only examples are girls who knew their place and didn't chase vanity. That's how it begins, and soon, you're measuring yourself by rules you never agreed to. Don't laugh too loud. Don't eat too fast. Don't sit with your knees apart. Don't be proud of your reflection. Don't wear color unless it's Sunday. Don't braid your hair unless it's a feast day. Don't look at him. Don't look like you looked at him. Don't age. Don't talk about aging. Don't look too young either, or they'll wonder what you're trying to pull. There's no end to the list. And the worst part, you start repeating it to yourself. You find yourself hiding joy. Apologizing for being noticed. Making your step smaller, your voice gentler, your opinions quieter, until you're not sure if you've become graceful or just invisible, and they call it modesty. But what they mean is containment. They want you neat. Manageable. Not too much. You're not supposed to burst. Not with beauty. Not with rage. Not with longing. Especially not longing. Wanting things makes you messy. Messy makes you dangerous. Dangerous makes you worth watching. And once they're watching, they're judging. And once they're judging, well, you know the rest. Historians still argue whether medieval women truly internalized these ideals or if they just performed them for survival. But you know how heavy a performance can feel when it lasts your whole life. You see it in others, too, that girl at the market who glances at every reflective surface but flinches when someone catches her. That widow who wears her mourning veil like a badge even after she's stopped crying. That seamstress who once made a red dress for herself and never wore it again after someone muttered, "Too bold for a girl like you." You've been taught to fear your own bloom, and it's not just women, men feel it, too. The crippled corset wraps around them differently, less about beauty, more about stoicism. Don't cry. Don't tremble. Don't admire. Don't need. Don't ask for softness unless it's in battle hymns or bed sheets. Be tough. Be silent. Be stone. You've seen boys get laughed at for blushing. You've seen men mocked for caring. You've seen fathers tell their sons to stand up straight and stop fidgeting, even when the child's back was bleeding from a strap. It's all the same corset, just laced through different holes, and when you finally name it, you start to feel the bruises. They were always there. But naming gives you permission to examine them, to trace where the pressure's worst, where the thoughts aren't even yours. You hear echoes. Don't be full of yourself. Why not? You want to ask. You've been empty long enough. You remember once trying on a gown, just for a moment. It wasn't yours. It had been left behind at the manor, likely forgotten or discarded. It shimmered like wet ink. You looked in the mirror and felt your posture change. Your body softened into it. You felt powerful. Regal, and then the voice came, inside your own head, "You look ridiculous." That wasn't your voice, that was someone else's echo, long planted, now masquerading as instinct. You took the gown off, but you never forgot that moment. The shape you could have been. The feeling of ease was quickly replaced by shame. As if confidence were a costume, not a birthright. Quirky fact, there were sumptuary laws in several medieval kingdoms that forbade commoners from wearing certain fabrics, cuts, or colors, on pain of fines or worse. They said it was to preserve social order. But what it really did was teach people, from birth, that beauty had a ceiling. That looking too grand was lying. So, your mind gets dressed just like your body. One rule here. One tuck there. Eventually, you can't tell where the binding ends and you begin, but there's a trick to unlacing it, not all at once. You'd fall apart. But thread by thread, it starts with noticing. You catch yourself hunching and ask, "For whom?" You hear yourself downplay a compliment and ask, "Why?" You walk into a room and realize you've scanned it to see if you're too much before anyone said a word, and then, one day, you don't. You enter, and you stay tall. You wear the color you like, even if it draws attention. You let someone see you happy, not coy, not careful, but lit from the inside like stained glass. And sure, there are days you slip back into old shapes. The corset of the mind doesn't vanish, but now, you recognize it, and that recognition is freedom's first breath. You're not there yet, but you're no longer tangled in silence. But recognizing the corset doesn't mean you always fight it. Some days, you lace it tighter yourself. Voluntarily. It's familiar, after all. Predictable. A rhythm of self-correction that feels like safety. On those days, you nod too much. Smile a little too gently. You catch your reflection and whisper, "Not today." And smooth your dress instead of your spirit, because the truth is, letting go of the mental bindings is terrifying. What if no one likes what's underneath? What if the unlaced version of you is too loud, too rough, too different from what people have come to expect? What if beauty, once unfiltered, isn't enough, so you make trades? You keep the laugh soft, but you let the color stay. You walk a little straighter, but still lower your eyes when thanked. You say something true, but you smile while saying it, half freed, half bound, and you remind yourself, even that is progress. because the corset isn't just rules and shame, it's survival. Especially when the outside world reinforces it daily. You think you've healed, and then someone comments on your boldness like it's an accusation. Or asks if you're trying to attract attention when you're simply dressing for joy, and you feel yourself shrink again, but only for a moment, because something in you, something fierce and aching, remembers that feeling in the forbidden gown. That flicker of what it means to take up space. To live inside your skin like it's a kingdom, not a prison, so you push back. Gently, but firmly, you start to say no, not out of rebellion, but out of alignment. No, I won't pretend I didn't do my hair. No, I won't pretend I don't like the way my sleeves fall. No, I won't swallow my voice to seem easier to love. And each no is a loosening. A new hole unlaced. You find others like you, women with kind eyes and sharp tongues who stopped apologizing years ago. Men who paint their belts or embroider their sleeves and dare others to call them frivolous. A shepherd boy who hums while he braids wildflowers into his sister's hair. An old midwife who wears red shoes under her plain robe and winks at you when you notice. They exist, they've been unbinding themselves in plain sight, and seeing them is like finding a map. You start testing your own boundaries. You wear the color you were told you couldn't pull off. You dance barefoot at dusk and let the dust cling to your ankles without flinching. You let someone take your picture, not with chalk or paint, but just memory, and don't fidget when they say you look radiant, and the world doesn't collapse. People stare, yes, some whisper, but others smile. Some even follow, because courage spreads just as easily as fear, and the more you shed the corset, the more you realize you never needed it. It was never your skin. Just scaffolding. Temporary. Replaceable. You start asking different questions now, not am I too much? But who taught me that much was wrong? Not do I look good enough? But who gets to decide what enough is? You trace the threads of old thoughts back to their sources. That girl who shamed you for your laugh. That teacher who called you vain for adjusting your hair. That moment in the spring when you caught your reflection and liked it, and someone scowled. None of those things were about you, they were about them, their fears. Their corsets. Their bindings. You just happened to be nearby, so you stop carrying their weight. You stop folding yourself smaller so others can stand taller. You start letting beauty be yours again. Not borrowed. Not rented. Not given by permission. But born, built, chosen. It takes time. There are days you still reach for the laces. Out of habit. Out of fear. Out of the ache of old approval, but those days grow fewer, and on the days you leave the corset hanging behind the door, you breathe easier, you speak clearer, you laugh without checking the volume, you sit the way you want to sit, and your body remembers. It was never meant to be folded in half, it was meant to open. Like a flower. Like a book. Like a song you finally remember how to sing. They only notice you when you don't want to be seen, or when you've been too visible for too long, or when your face, your unremarkable, God-given, bone and freckle face, starts to echo something outside their comfort. Too serene, too sharp, too unreadable. That's when they decide what you are. And somehow, they always pick extremes. You're either a saint, or a witch. There's no middle, no room for just a person with calloused hands and a braid that won't behave. You light one candle and suddenly you're holy. Or hexed. Depends on the wind. See, medieval beauty wasn't just decoration. It was a declaration. Your look said something before you did. A glowing face might mean purity. Or temptation. Or danger. Or divine favor. Or devilish trickery. Or all of them at once, depending on who's watching, and who's nervous. Saintly women. Oh, they had to glow. Literally. If you weren't radiant enough, the painters added it in later. Golden halos, flushed cheeks, eyes always a little too wide, too soft. You were expected to be both spotless and sufferable. Holy pain made you more beautiful. The more ill you looked, the more heaven seemed near. Pale skin. A sign of fasting. Hollow cheeks. Proof of devotion. Lips too colorless to kiss. Perfect, because saints weren't supposed to be desirable. They were supposed to deny desire, but somehow, their portraits still turned out luminous. There's an open debate among scholars about whether early saint iconography was meant to suppress sexuality or accidentally made it worse. Because you look at some of those painted Magdalens and, well, those are not modest shoulders. Those are not modest anything. Still, you knew better than to say it aloud. You learned early, saints glowed because they were chosen. And if you glowed for any other reason, if your hair caught the sun, if your eyes sparkled from laughter, if your lips happened to bloom the same red as the summer poppies, well. Then came the other word, witch. They didn't need proof. They needed proximity. A failed harvest. A crying child. A man who wanted you, and then regretted it. You were too pretty, too strange, too quiet, too confident, so you must have made a deal with something, you must have brewed something, you must have been something, because beauty without permission. That's threatening. Especially when it's yours alone. You remember the weaver's daughter. She had long fingers and an unfortunate knack for knowing things before they happened. She once predicted a fire, and the church steeple burned the next week. She said the midwife would birth twins, and she did. She was plain, until she wasn't. Until the way she held herself changed. Until she walked with that ease that comes from knowing your own power, and then the whispers started, not because she wore red, not because she cursed anyone, but because she stopped flinching when men spoke. They found herbs in her basket and decided they'd always been dangerous. You watched them tie her hands. You watched her walk, shoulders high, chin unbent, toward a trial where the verdict had already been sewn into the hem of her dress. They called her a witch, but you remember her differently, as someone who simply refused to be unseen. That's the threat, isn't it? Not darkness, but visibility without apology. That's why they love saints. Saints make beauty passive. Saints suffer it. Saints don't wield it. Saints are acted upon. Soft, tragic, glorified. Safe, but a beautiful woman who knows she's beautiful. Who doesn't shrink from it. Now that is witchcraft, not spells. Not cauldrons. Not talking to crows, just existing too brightly for someone else's comfort. Quirky tidbit. In parts of 13th century France, women could be accused of witchcraft for simply carrying a mirror. Not because of vanity, but because mirrors were thought to trap souls. They called it catching reflection. Which is honestly just a very medieval way of saying, we're terrified of women who can see themselves clearly, and weren't you always taught to blur your edges? Even compliments had claws. Too pretty for your own good. She'll break hearts. She's dangerous. As if your existence came with a warning label, so you learned to hide your light. To slouch. To mute your laughter. To say thank you like an apology, because if you didn't, well, it only took a gust of gossip and the right phase of the moon, and suddenly you were someone's cautionary tale. But here's the secret no one said aloud: you don't have to pick, saint. Witch, these aren't your choices. These are their words. Their boxes. Their anxieties projected onto your jawline. You're not here to fit their frame. Let them call you what they want. You know what you are. You are not an omen. You are not a miracle. You are not a trap laid in rose petals or a prayer scrawled in Latin. You're a person, with a face that catches light, with a voice that sometimes wobbles, sometimes roars, with a body that belongs to itself. That's the part they can't stand. That you walk through the world with your own definition. That you might kneel, when you choose. That you might speak, to challenge, not to charm. That you can be holy and furious. Lovely and loud. Gentle and unwilling, the unseeable part. That's what you guard, that's what they'll never reach. The soft shadow under your ribs where names don't matter and shame doesn't grow. The part of you that doesn't care whether they call you sacred or sinful. The part that keeps you intact no matter what mask they try to assign. You touch it sometimes when the nights stretch long and silent. That inner tether, you remember the weaver's daughter. You remember the saints in the paintings. You remember all the women who walked the same tightrope and didn't fall, they flew. You think, maybe it's not about what they call you, maybe it's about what you answer to. But still, names leave stains. And it's not just women, men who are too beautiful are told to make themselves useful. To earn their place through deeds. A handsome face without scars. Suspicious. A strong back without humility. Threatening, even monks weren't exempt. A well-shaped novice might be separated from his brothers. Not for punishment, but for protection. Because beauty, even cloaked in modesty, could cause distraction. Could stir thoughts. Could challenge the illusion of control, so the real fear wasn't just in what beauty could do, it was what it could awaken: desire. Envy. Longing. Regret. Things best left buried in cold stone and silent halls, the ones who refused to be ashamed of their appearance. They were exiled in quiet ways. Excluded from certain feasts. Left out of stories. Kept just far enough from the heart that their glow wouldn't catch on others, but you remember them, you remember the glint in their eyes, you remember the way they held themselves, not defiant, but complete, and that's what made them unforgettable, because real beauty isn't in the face or form, it's in the refusal to disappear, it's in the whisper, I see myself. I won't look away. And that is magic, that's why they feared the witches, that's why they painted the saints. That's why mirrors were banned and praised and broken and begged for, not because of what they reflected, but because of what they confirmed. That beauty lives, that it breathes, that it doesn't need permission. Let's take a step sideways, away from the convent bells and courtly whispers, past the hedgerows of Europe's damp green villages, and toward the dusty trade routes where spices drift like rumors, and silks sing in every breeze. Here, along caravan trails and under desert suns, beauty sounds different. It smells different. It moves differently, and it's still being watched, still measured, still dangerous. You find yourself standing in a Mongol encampment at the edge of a sunrise. The wind cuts brisk and clean, snapping tent flaps and stirring the smoke of horse-dung fires. There's no marble here. No gold-gilded mirrors. But beauty is very much alive, it begins with the brows. Long straight. Black as storm feathers. Groomed not for flirtation but for precision. A Mongol woman can shoot an arrow while riding at full gallop, and do it while her braids remain perfectly symmetrical. She wears her beauty like armor, braided, beaded, calculated. Her cheeks are wind-kissed not from powder but from real riding, real sun, real cold, and you realize, beauty here isn't separate from survival, it is survival, the contour of a jaw signals strength. A braid's thickness. Health. The cleanliness of one's nails. Discipline. Forget courtly paleness, out here, pale means you've been sick or lazy, you catch a glimpse of a young girl brushing soot across her lids, not to seduce, but to shield from glare. Function and form are twins here, not rivals. She notices you watching and lifts one eyebrow as if to say, yes, I'm fierce, and yes, I look good doing it. Historians still debate how much Mongol fashion was inherited from conquest versus borrowed from those they conquered. But most agree, whatever they took, they made their own. A looped earring might have started in Persia, a silk panel in China, a perfumed oil from the distant south, but together, they become a look that says, I ride with storms. Beauty here is unbothered by fragility. It gallops. It bites. It laughs with its mouth full of meat and doesn't apologize. You wonder how European nuns would react to these painted brows, or how a Parisian lady would feel, faced with a Mongol horsewoman who's both more muscled and more ornamented. because the lines don't match up. You were taught to fear too much color. Too much strength, but here, too little color means something's wrong. Too soft means you'll freeze before winter's out. You shift west again, down into the cobbled alleys of Moorish Spain, where perfume and poetry hang in the air thicker than smoke. In Andalusia, beauty is a language spoken in texture. In shadow. In scent, it begins before you even see anyone, you smell them. Ambergris. Musk. Rosewater stirred with crushed mint. Hair is combed with oil so fragrant that when someone walks past, you turn involuntarily. Men, too, they were sent as part of their morning ritual. Not just a splash, but layered, like armor made of memory. One spice to wake the mind. One flower to soothe. One resin to seduce. A Moorish scholar once wrote that the soul travels through scent before it speaks with the tongue. You believe it, and the faces, soft and shadowed. Brows defined with kohl. Teeth cleaned with miswak sticks until they gleam. Skin brushed with ground pearl or saffron or almond milk. You meet a woman with henna'd palms and golden threads in her veil. She has a way of tilting her head that makes you question everything you thought you knew about modesty. She's veiled, yes, but there's nothing hidden about her power. The way she walks says, I'm worth waiting for. The way she speaks says, I've read every book in your library, and I smell better doing it. And you realize something unsettling. You've been taught beauty meant passive. Here, it's active. Not just about being beautiful, but making it, choosing it, crafting it, curating a body like one curates a poem. Even a beggar might wear a dab of jasmine oil behind their ear, not out of vanity, but out of dignity. You can't help but notice how many versions of beauty exist across this landscape, and how arbitrary your old rules seem now. Fair skin. Not everywhere, thin waists. Not essential, pale lashes. Irrelevant, instead, scent. Line. Movement. Color. Beauty is local, it has dialects. In North Africa, a woman's tattoo across her chin might mark a tribe, a rite of passage, or a superstition. It's not meant to be sexy, but it is seen. In Egypt, a girl might darken her fingertips with indigo for celebration. The contrast against her skin is deliberate. Chosen. In Baghdad, a man wears robes so elegantly cut that they flutter like birds when he walks. He knows it. He wants you to know he knows it. Quirky tidbit. Some Moorish alchemists experimented with colored glass powders to mimic gemstones in cosmetics. They crushed emerald-tinted silica into pastes for eyelids. Pure illusion, but gorgeously convincing. Even the illusion is part of the point, because beauty isn't just how you look. It's the performance of being seen, and the further you walk along these trade routes, carrying silks, scrolls, scents, and stories, the clearer it becomes. Europe didn't invent beauty, it just forgot how wide it could be. You've spent so long under the weight of narrowness. Now, your senses are overwhelmed. In the best way. You smell stories. You hear colors, you taste oil paints and amber in the back of your throat, and you realize that beauty isn't one thing to master, it's a language with 1,000 accents, and suddenly, the mirror isn't an enemy anymore, it's an instrument, a lens, a small, flat gate to everything you've carried from these places. You're not looking for flaws now, you're translating. What does your skin say today? What does your scent whisper? Which borrowed ritual, Mongol soot, Moorish oil, Berber braid, feels like yours? You don't have to choose just one, you're a caravan now, a moving mosaic of stories pressed into skin, and every time you look at your reflection, it looks back a little wiser, a little richer, a little freer. But even as you gather these fragments, scents, symbols, styles, you can't help but notice who gets left out of the conversation. Not every traveler is seen. Not every face is welcomed as beautiful, no matter how intricately lined, how carefully perfumed, how full of life. You spot it in the corners of markets. The girl whose skin is darker than sandalwood, standing behind jars of indigo. Her eyes are striking. Her posture is proud. But no one stops to call her lovely. Not in the way they did the silk merchant's daughter, whose cheeks are powdered pale. She sees it too. You notice it in the way she lifts her chin, sharper than necessary. Beauty in her case must be defended before it's admired. Even among variety, there is hierarchy. Moorish Spain was a melting pot of North African, Arab, Berber, Jewish, and Christian cultures, but not all of them got equal praise. Skin tone, nose shape, body type, all of it filtered through politics. A Moorish woman might be exoticized by a Christian poet but excluded from inheritance laws. A North African prince could be famed for his style, yet mocked behind his back for wearing gold. Beauty, even here, is political. And you begin to feel the heat of that realization settle between your shoulders, because if beauty is something people make, with paint, oil, scent, stance, then it can also be stolen. Appropriated. Misquoted. Marketed. You think of the Mongol brow, now flattened into a fashion sketch in someone else's diary. You think of the tattooed Berber cheeks, passed off as tribal glamour at a French masquerade. You think of the saffron-stained palms of Moorish women, copied in faint imitation by someone who never knew its prayerful origin. And maybe that's the final truth. Beauty is a trade route too. You never asked to be immortalized, and yet, there you are, staring back from the wall of some candlelit gallery, chin lifted at just the right angle, hair smoothed flatter than it's ever been in your actual life. A face cleaned of blemish. Eyes painted large and obedient. No hint of the mole above your lip, no trace of the crooked tooth that makes your real smile slightly mischievous. The portrait lies. Kindly. Almost lovingly, but it lies, because in medieval Europe, likeness wasn't the point. Flattery was, you weren't painted to be remembered, you were painted to be believed, believed as a wife, a bride, a daughter, a duchess, a betrothed. Believed as good, quiet, devout. As beautiful in the way the viewer needed you to be. Which is to say, familiar. Ideal. Controlled, so the artist makes choices, your jawline. Slimmer, your neck. Longer, your gaze. Less opinionated, and the result. A version of you that's not false, but edited, until it feels less like memory and more like marketing, and if you're lucky, you get a nameplate, if not, you're just lady with ermine. Or unknown noblewoman in blue. Your identity erased even as your face is preserved. That's the trade, because these portraits weren't about you, they were about them, the men who commissioned them, the legacy they were polishing, the bride price they were advertising. In one painting, you wear a red velvet gown laced so tight it looks like your lungs had to make a deal with your ribs. In another, you're seated beside a lute you never learned to play. In all of them, your hands are folded just so, demure, delicate, sexless. Historians still debate how much agency noblewomen had in their own portraiture. A few letters survive with instructions, make my cheeks less round, or paint me with my favorite hound. But mostly, the painters followed unspoken codes. Symmetry over reality. Elegance over accuracy. You begin to see a pattern. Beauty wasn't what you were. It was what they needed you to appear, and if the real you didn't fit, well, paintbrushes are forgiving, sometimes, dangerously so. You remember one case, a portrait sent across a border to secure a royal marriage. The girl was painted glowing and soft, with cheeks like pink fruit and eyes like moonlight. The suitor accepted. The wedding was arranged. When did he finally meet her in person? He sent her back, because she was not as advertised. She had a limp. A slight scar from childhood. A voice too deep for his taste, none of which had made it into the painting. They called it false representation. As if her body had betrayed its branding, no one blamed the painter. They blamed her, for existing in a body that defied her own legend, but you know better. You've looked into enough mirrors to know that truth shifts depending on who's looking, and maybe that's what haunts you about the portraits, not that they lie, but that people believe them. You once saw yourself in a mirror after a fever, hair damp, skin blotched, eyes burning from dreams, and you thought, this is also me. You didn't look sacred. or soft, or paintable, you looked alive, messy, mortal, real, and in that moment, more beautiful than any oil-on would ever capture. But no one paints that, because that kind of beauty isn't for galleries, it doesn't perform. It stares back. It dares the viewer to keep looking even when the glow is gone. Quirky detail. Some medieval painters deliberately feminized male saints and angels, softening their faces, reddening their lips, to make them appear more holy. The logic was simple: the closer to beauty, the closer to God, which makes you wonder, if beauty was holy, but also dangerous, if saints glowed and witches tempted, if portraits flattered and mirrors scolded, where was the safe place to just be? You start to realize, there wasn't one, not really, even alone, you carry the gaze. Never let your mouth look like it could argue, smile just enough to appear generous, never enough to seem smug. You weren't just immortalized, you were trained. Taught to be seen a certain way, until even your reflection starts to cooperate with the painting. Until the oil version becomes more real than the warm blood and tired bones you carry through the day. There's a woman you recall, painted in lapis blue, with fingers like ivory reeds and a waist cinched so tight the folds in her gown seemed to whisper of breathlessness. In life, she was known for her temper. In paint, she looks docile, soft. The temper's been erased, brushed away like a stain. Her story rewritten in brushstrokes and silk. They say her husband commissioned the painting after their fifth argument. A peace offering, or a threat. This is the version of you I prefer. She died before 40. Her portrait outlived her by centuries. You saw it once in a castle hallway, lit by flickering lamps and the hush of velvet shoes. You stood in front of it longer than you meant to. Not because it was beautiful, but because you knew she had once wanted to scream, and someone had sealed that scream behind layers of pigment. Maybe that's what beauty did, in those times. It silenced you with aesthetics, it turned the wildest lives into still images and told them to be content with survival. But here's the strange turn. Some women fought back, inside the very same frame. They hid symbols, they raised eyebrows ever so slightly, they requested certain backgrounds, bookshelves, maps, flowering branches, all coded messages that said, I'm more than what you see. Some asked to be painted with objects that didn't fit: a knife, a snake, a broken lute, an unfinished embroidery. Things that meant nothing to most, but everything to them. There's open scholarly debate about whether these symbols were acts of rebellion or just eccentricity. But you know better. You've practiced enough silent defiance to recognize it when you see it. You know that sometimes, resistance looks like holding the gaze, like refusing to look pretty without looking present, like saying, I will not be only what you expect of me. You do that now, too, not with portraits, but with choices. You wear the coat that's slightly too bold for your mother's taste. You walk slower when someone tries to hurry you. You keep the scar on your chin uncovered, even when offered powder. And somewhere inside you, the painted woman nods, not because you've freed her, but because you've joined her. And that's the real secret, isn't it? That beauty never lived in a frame. It lived in the cracks, in the unfinished corners, in the things the brush tried to smooth away, but couldn't fully erase. And the more you see it, the more you realize, your true portrait isn't on canvas, it's in how you carry yourself when no one's looking, how you speak when there's no echo of expectation, how you choose what to love about your own reflection, even when it doesn't match what you were taught to admire. Your beauty is not a still life, it's a storm. It doesn't hang on a wall, it walks out of the frame. When the frame is no longer around you, you begin to paint again, not for the walls, for the wind. You remember the herbs your grandmother taught you to use. You tend to them. You rub lavender behind your knees, not because anyone will smell it, but because you will. You keep company with forgotten things, broken spindle heads, cracked tiles, fabric scraps too small to mend but too lovely to throw away, things that, like you, no longer serve the story, and have therefore become free to tell their own. You become an unreliable narrator in your own village. You are called quiet, then wise, then strange. You begin to lean into it, You hum when it rains, you pick figs before they're fully ripe. You say things like, the moon doesn't always need to be full to pull the tide. And people begin to listen again, but differently, not because you are beautiful, not because you are young, but because you have outlived the need to explain yourself. You meet another woman, older still, whose laugh sounds like spoons clattering in a drawer. She teaches you how to dry lemon peel over coals to scent a room. It keeps ghosts honest, she says, and you nod, as if you've always known. You take a mirror from your shelf and cover it, not because you hate what you see, but because you already know, and knowing has made seeing unnecessary. You walk differently now, not slowly, heavily. Like someone who owns her weight in the world, you do not knock when entering rooms, you do not apologize when stepping over thresholds. You are not beautiful the way you were taught to be, you are beautiful the way firelight is beautiful, visible only to those who stay close enough to feel the heat. You have become unpaintable, unframeable, too many stories and contradictions to compress into pigment and pose. They will try. They'll tell your story in partial sentences. She used to live by the orchard. She made the best plum wine. She wore her shawl over her head even in summer. Some will call you mad, some will call you blessed, all will be wrong, because only you know the truth, only you know the secret, that fading from the frame wasn't an end, it was a beginning, it was the soft unbuckling of centuries of posture, the loosening of a corset sewn from other people's opinions, the cool air hitting your ribs after being wrapped too tight for too long. You don't glow now, you radiate, not in the way they painted saints, with halos and upturned eyes. You radiate like something rooted, like stone warmed by the sun. You are not an icon, you are soil, fertile, patient, filled with things that haven't even begun to bloom. And the girls who come after you, they will hear you in the floorboards, in the stories half whispered over soup, in the smell of dried lavender when no one remembers where it came from. They won't know your name, but they'll feel your shape, not because of the portrait you left behind, but because you never needed one. You lived instead, and living leaves its own mark. It just takes longer to see, but sometimes, the world calls you back. Just when you thought you'd vanished into smoke and memory, just when your hands had learned to work without being seen, your voice to sing without needing a name, someone says it. Softly. Casually. Almost without knowing, I think she used to. And there it is again, a ripple. Your outline is reforming, not fully. Not clearly. But enough that you're summoned, not by name, but by presence. Someone reaches for the old recipe you kept under a cracked pot. Someone tries to copy the stitch you invented to keep sleeves from fraying. Someone lights a candle the way you used to, 3 breaths before the flame, 1 hum through the nose. They don't know where they learned it, but you do. Because fading from the frame doesn't mean you disappeared, it means you bled into everything. Into the way hands cup water at dawn, into the rhythm of feet on stone stairs, into the pause people take before lying, just long enough to wonder what you would have thought. Your memory is no longer pinned in gold leaf or hung in halls, it's hung in habit, woven into gestures. Tucked into lullabies, you became the beauty that no longer needed to be seen to be felt, the kind that lingers, the kind that grows in silence, and that's the most lasting kind of all. And now, as the last embers of the story curl into silence, you find yourself lying still, so still the weight of your own body feels like part of the bed, the floor, the earth itself. You've walked through centuries tonight. Through smoky bathhouses, fragrant palaces, chilled stone cloisters, and dust-choked markets where beauty shimmered like a mirage. You've stood in the frame. You've slipped from it. You've caught your reflection in places no mirror ever reached, and none of it was quite what they said it would be. Beauty was never just one thing. Not youth. Not symmetry. Not praise, it was survival. Resistance. Distraction. Power. Sometimes prison, sometimes escape, sometimes just a flicker in the firelight, reminding you that you exist. You remember the women now, not for how they looked, but for how they moved. How they worked dough with salt-cracked hands. How they stitched truths into hems. How they stood in shadows not because they were small, but because they knew when to watch, and the men, too, wrapped in vanity and armor both, tending to their mustaches like they were crops, hoping a strong jawline might buy them the respect their silence couldn't. You're not falling asleep now, you're drifting, like a forgotten name into a song, like perfume clinging to the collar of a robe long passed on. The truth is, your beauty has never lived in anyone else's eyes. Not truly, it lives in how you choose to wake each morning, in how you carry your ache, in how you smile anyway. So rest easy now, there are no portraits here, no labels, no watchers, just the quiet hum of breath, the soft weight of covers, and the knowledge that whoever you are, even with your smudges and slouch and sleep-heavy limbs, is exactly enough. You're already beautiful, even here, especially here. Good night. Sweet dreams.